Good evening. Councilmember Shane McFarland is supposed to have the prayer and pledge tonight, but he is with his wife and celebrating the arrival of their third child, so he cannot be with us tonight. So to recognize that happy event and to memorialize that for the record, if you will, I'd like to ask each of you to join us in a silent prayer and keep the McFarland family in your prayers. And also, following that, we will have our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So if you will, bow your heads with me. Amen. If you will rise with me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening and welcome to Murfreesboro City Council, August the 23rd of 2012. And I must say that we're unaccustomed to being so popular as we are tonight. And we welcome each and every one of you tonight, as we do every week that we meet. We would encourage anyone who's interested in our City Council and the activities of our City Council and our staff to come to City Council meetings and kind of follow on. And, of course, if you cannot, we have City TV, which is available. I believe that's Comcast Channel 3, and if you have ATT UVerse, that's on Channel 99. I'll go ahead and get that plug in for our City TV channel, so that they have our City Council meetings and Parks and Rec and Planning Department and a lot of other things on City TV, and it's very interesting. I also would like to recognize former council member Mary Huda is here. Mary, if you would stand up and be recognized. I want to thank you for your service to the Murfreesboro City Council. Mary got me involved years ago with the Beautification Commission, which she began, and certainly that has kind of morphed into our urban environmental department, and I think in many ways, if you see our street corners and pocket parks and the areas that our urban environmental folks take good care of, that was all with the vision of Mary Huda and folks who worked with her, so I'm very pleased and proud of that. I also would like to recognize Dr. Sidney Mcphee, who is here, president of MTSU, and we appreciate you being here with us. Dr. McPhee reminds me from time to time of the economic impact of MTSU to our community, and certainly going back many years, my dad did everything he could do to empty the state's treasury into Murfreesboro and Rutherford County and help MTSU grow into the wonderful academic achievement institution that it is today. And Dr. McPhee, we're honored to have you and your staff and folks with you, as we are to have everyone who's with us here tonight. And there are seats up here in the front. It's not like a courtroom. I can't order you to come take a seat, but certainly you may be more comfortable. If you want to, you can come right up to the center aisle and just kind of move over and take a seat there. We'd love to have everyone be seated to make you be comfortable. And we'll try to get through this as quickly as possible. I also would like to recognize a special individual for me. It's my accountant, and he's been doing my tax returns and keeping me out of jail for about 40 years. David Hall is right over here, and I wanted to say hello to David. David.
Are you going to release your tax returns, Mayor?
What?
Are you going to release your tax returns?
My tax returns, no. They'll be too embarrassing how much tax I've been paying. So. Anyway, it's wonderful to have all of you here. And the final announcement I have before we begin is that one of our council members, and I'm not going to call out her name, but she will be celebrating a very significant birthday next week. She will be 39 years old next week. And we're really pleased that Madeline Harris has joined our council, and we're very pleased that she carries on the fine tradition.
60, Mayor, and I'm proud of it.
Okay. Well, I did not want to disclose any medical information. It could have been sensitive under HIPAA or anything like that. So thank you, and we look forward to celebrating your birthday with us next week if we have a city council meeting. So maybe we can have a little cake and wear little hats and
Just give me the money.
balloons. Give me the money.
Show me the money.
All right. It's nice to have all of you here, and we appreciate your attendance. As we go through our agenda tonight, and we have a relatively short agenda until we get to a public hearing that some of you may be here for. We'll just go through that one item at a time and see how council would like to react to those issues that we have before us. And on your consent agenda tonight, you have 5 items. If you've had an opportunity to look through those items on your consent agenda, are there any questions regarding the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion?
I move for passage.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. Please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. We have second readings tonight to consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to amend ordinance which adopted the fiscal year 2012-2013 budget by amending page 1 of the Exhibit A to the said ordinance. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. A motion and second. Please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to amend Appendix A zoning, Section 24, Overlay District Regulations.
Move for passage on second reading.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and second. Please call the roll. Ms. Wright?
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, we'll consider for passage on second reading an ordinance to zone an area along Joe B. Jackson Parkway as a planned signage overlay PSO district.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. A motion and a second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gelly.
Aye.
Ms. Scales Harris.
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington.
Aye.
Mr. Young.
Aye.
Mayor Bragg.
Aye. At this time, under new business, we'll conduct a public hearing to consider a master plan amendments for the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport, the proposed 2012 airport layout plan. Notice of the said public hearing was published in the August 5th, 2012 issue of a local newspaper. Welcome, Mr. Adelot.
Thank you, Mayor Bragg and members of the council. Tonight, the council is faced with considering a master plan of the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport, the airport layout plan. The Planning Commission has studied this through the course of this spring and early winter and on into the summer. And on August the 1st, it held a public hearing. The public hearing was well attended. There were quite a number of people who spoke. At the conclusion of the public hearing, the Planning Commission adopted on a majority vote the plan. Then at our last meeting, the Planning Commission memorialized that with a resolution which is included in your agenda materials, which it also adopted on a majority vote. What the airport layout plan is, it's more than just about the runway, although I think the runway is the big issue that seems to have the interest of many of the people who are probably attending tonight. But the airport layout plan is a master plan of the entire property. And what we have is a city resource. It's a city's property that is, in many respects, it's overseen by our airport commission. The airport commission is responsible for how the land is used and making decisions about it and its recommendations to the council. In order to fund many of the decisions and the implementations of the things we do out there, we require funding from the state and the federal government. In order to have that kind of funding, and in order to be in good standing to receive it, we are required to have a master plan and to periodically update it. And that's what this is, the airport layout plan that is necessary to remain in good standing to be able to qualify for the type of funding that helps us to operate our airport. Our airport is pretty much a self-sufficient operation. It doesn't receive tax dollars like some of the other departments. So it's something that's a little bit different. In order to do this study, we've hired a consultant. The consultant has been working on this. Mr. Chad Gerke is our director of the airport. He's going to make a presentation about what the plan includes, and then at the conclusion of his presentation, if there's no comments from any of the consultants, or if you don't have questions, we'll move into a public hearing and we'll hear from the public.
Thank you, Mr. Adelot. Mr. Gerke?
Thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council. I'm glad to be here today to represent and present to you this airport layout plan. And I have for you a presentation that will be describing some of the significant facts about the airport layout plan. In my presentation also will be joining me is Darren Duckworth from Atkins, who's the chief engineer on this project. And also in closing comments will be George Huddleston Jr., who is the chair of the Airport Commission. And as Joseph just summed up for you, the purpose of the airport layout plan is tied to the FAA grant assurances, which requires our airport to have an airport layout plan done every 5 to 10 years. We update our airport safety and design standards, make sure we're current with all of those. We review the current and future needs of the community and the airport customers, and we document projected and ultimate improvements. Items included in the ALP receive funding. Anything that we leave out will not receive funding. So it's very important that we look, when we do our planning, that we're looking at all the possibilities that might occur over that extended time period. And as Joseph said, an airport layout plan is just a planning document. Our city uses the ALP for capital improvement projections, construction plans, airspace protection in the way of the airport overlay district, and a number of other purposes. It is a true tool that we use. Adoption of the ALP does not commit the city to complete all the improvements recommended as shown. Projects may be partially completed or never completed at all. In 2008, the City Council granted approval of the Airport Commission to start the airport layout planning process. The scope of work included 4 main points: study of the runway protection zones, runway length, terminal area, and sufficient area for future MTSU aerospace facilities. The runway protection zone. The airport layout plan recommends that the areas in the RPZ, the runway protection zone, not owned by the city, be identified for future acquisition. An agreement was made with the Tennessee Aeronautics Division which states that the properties will be purchased in the future on a voluntary basis when federal, state, and local funding is available. The next item was the appropriate runway length. The ALP recommends an ultimate runway length of 5,000 feet that meets the needs of the current and future turboprop and turbojet aircraft. This is the chosen runway alternative with a recommended runway extension of 1,102 feet to the north off the present end of the north end of the runway. This was reviewed in our December 2010 special joint meeting and the following City Council meeting where we approved the study of the environmental assessment. The terminal and terminal area. The airport layout plan terminal area drawings recommend that a renovated or new terminal building be located in the current terminal location. The ALP recommends a number of improvements to the terminal area ramp that will improve the flow of aircraft maneuvering on the ground around the terminal area, with a recommended location of a new fueling area. I have provided a picture of that area for you. It's pretty much surrounded by the terminal area. The terminal will stay where it is on the Circle Drive off of Airport Road. The area for MTSU Aerospace Airport Campus continued development. The airport layout plan recommends a significant area north of the current MTSU Aerospace Airport Campus that is sufficient for the future location of a number of hangars and other buildings, along with a dedicated ramp to house and to store the MTSU fleet of training aircraft. The blue area is the extended ramp and buildings that we have just drawn in boxes where future hangars or instructional buildings could be located. And this, again, kind of goes back to the terminal area, where dedicating an area to their fleet will help the overall flow of traffic around the terminal area for based and transient or visiting aircraft. The overall goal was to present the City Planning Commission, the City Council, and the Community and Airport Layout Plan that, one, showed a realistic development plan that meets the needs of the community and in the future and continues to improve safety. Two, it incorporates restrictions, modifications to address community concerns, and a Plan 3 that was coordinated with the Tennessee Aeronautics Division and the Federal Aviation Administration, ensuring that the plan met all the federal safety and design requirements. The airport has been serving the city of Murfreesboro successfully for 60 years. The Airport Commission has been diligent in staying informed of all federal, state issues, as well as taking note of local community issues and concerns through the years. In fact, 3 out of the 7 of our commissioners live under the pattern on the north end of the airport. Knowing the possible difficulties and length of time coordination would take through the Tennessee Aeronautics Division and the FAA, it was imperative that the local issues, restrictions, and compromises be integrated into the plan from the beginning and incorporated throughout the process whenever possible. The Airport Commission formed a study group, which included the city engineer and the city planning director, to assist us through this planning process. The Airport Commission and consultants were able to successfully negotiate with the Tennessee Aeronautics Division an unprecedented amount of meetings for state and local coordination efforts. Now let's talk about the limitations and the concessions. First of all, the production of the plan that is financially feasible given the fact that the airport is self-supportive, putting no burden on the local tax dollars. Again, anything that shows up on the airport layout plan would be funded through state and federal FAA monies, which is usually 90% funded, or in this case right now, we're under a good period where we're able to get 95% funding. The Murfreesboro Airport is one of only 3 or 4 general aviation airports in Tennessee that are self-supportive. We maintain the FAA B2 airport category. Right now, we are B2, and this airport layout plan shows that we're B2. And to keep B2 in perspective, it is one category above the smallest and slowest approach speed of aircraft. No change to the runway weight-bearing capability. This effectively disallows the regular operation of substantially larger, heavier aircraft at the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport. I'm going to ask Darren Duckworth, the engineer with Atkins, to come up, and we're going to talk a little bit about a concern in the community is that the larger, heavier aircraft will be able to land at the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport with the runway extended to 5,000 feet. The picture before that was of a core sample of our pavement in preparation for our overlay that we will be doing next summer. Darren was able to take those core samples and run some numbers. The analysis was performed on the structural stability of the runway pavement at the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport using the FAA's pavement design software. It's called FAR-Field. So they like to put that FAA in whenever they can. So I'll turn this over to Darren.
Thanks, Chad. So as Chad was saying, we used data that we collected as part of a geotechnical study for some upcoming maintenance work that we're going to do on the runway. And we plugged that data, as you can see depicted on the slide here, into that FAA software to determine the structural characteristics of it, to have that modeled into the system. What you see over on the other side of the slide is one of the cores representing the pavement thickness. That's one part of the data that you enter to run this analysis. The other part is the fleet mix, the mix of aircraft that use the airport. So we added to that the aircraft list of types of aircraft that are in the environmental assessment document. It's been prepared. We ran the analysis with the 2008 baseline fleet mix and the projected 2013 fleet mix, with the results being that the pavement was very structurally sound as compared to the FAA's guideline of a 20-year useful structural life. We then performed that analysis again, the value of this software being that you can easily run iterative analyses, where we we added one operation per day of aircraft at the currently published maximum allowable strength bearing capacity of the pavement. When we added that one flight a day of the maximum currently allowable aircraft, it resulted in a structural life calculation at 22.3 years, which is right in line with what the FAA's design criteria tell you should have your pavement designed for. So we felt very good about the calibration of the model at that point, and we added an occasional Gulfstream II aircraft, which is one of your sort of the larger, not one of the larger, but it's a larger aircraft than currently come in. It's a good-sized corporate jet. It's maybe 20% above the weight-bearing capacity of the pavement as it's currently published. We took out the daily operations of aircraft operating at the current limit and substituted that for a once per week in and once per week out operation of this larger aircraft. And at 62,000 pound dual wheel load, the result was that the structural life calculation dropped to less than 10 years. And what that tells us is that it is not a sustainable use for the pavement structure. So based on that calculation, we would not recommend increasing the published weight limits of the current runway.
Just to keep the pavement, that core sample in perspective, the Medical Center Parkway asphalt is about 9.5 inches, and in your neighborhoods we have 3.5 to 4 inches of asphalt. So we're somewhere around a cul-de-sac on our runway for our pavement. These are typically the aircraft that, back to the presentation, these are typically the aircraft that come into the airport right now, and there are no changes forecasted for the future except for more use of a Jetstream 31 if we would go to that aircraft in place of the King Air 200. Other limitations and concessions. When the city took over the management of the airport in 1994, I spent a great deal of time with Mayor Joe B. Jackson at the time and the president of the university, Dr. Walker, and we were looking at putting MTSU's airport operations on the east side of the airport. They had received some federal money. They were going to build a new facility, and everything would be on the east side for the university, and the general aviation and the public would be on the west side. Those plans did not occur. In the meantime, we've realized with the development on the east side of the airport that the trees, over 43 acres of trees on the east side, we're going to maintain those as a noise buffer and a sound buffer. We also have a large area on the south end of the airport that has an navigation easement over it. That allows us to go ahead and remove all the trees if we wanted to that are under that approach. But as you can see in the picture, we've elected over the last 14 years to go in, about 3 times we have done this now, and just work with the trees, work with the arborist to trim those trees. The sound deadening is important there. The barrier that those trees and that foliage has between neighborhoods, apartment complex, and airport is important to maintain. So that does cost us a great deal of money and funds, but it is important. No relocation of the aircraft engine run-up on the north end of the runway. This minimizes the neighborhood noise from the aircraft ground movement. I'm going to put a picture from your airport layout plan on the little projector here, and I want to show you what I'm talking about here. Is that on this north end you'll see a little bubble. The little bubble is a bit of pavement that the aircraft pull out on during their flight check before they take off. They do an engine run-up, which means they have to put the throttle in, full engine, check their instrumentation. Some pilots do this for a great deal of time. Some are very quick with it. They don't want to burn the gas. So they do that in that area. In this plan, we do not show that run-up area extending on the north end. We did that for noise purposes. We wanted to keep it where it is currently. We thought that was important. We've even implemented a no engine run-up at night right now from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and we've had good results from that from our neighbors, good feedback that is working. We wanted to also engineer the new PAPI aircraft approach guidance system, light system, to maximize the altitude that the aircraft on the approach to runway 18. By maximizing the aircraft altitude over the north end of Murfreesboro, the airport gives up some stopping distance. In your airport layout plan, I'm going to go back to the overhead here. For the future runway, it has some drawings on there of approaches. And those lines that you see are not the approaches that the aircraft take. That is simply the airspace that we are drawing a line to protect the navigation of the aircraft coming into the airport. The actual approach is well above that. For example, part of the airspace that we protect over the city, the largest airspace protection that we have is called the horizontal surface. It goes all over the city, and it's only 150 feet off the ground. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that the airplanes can fly that low. In fact, they're 1,000 feet above the city. So don't be too worried about that. That is just a line that we draw to help us protect, like we go in and trim the trees, a line that we look at to protect that approach. We removed approximately 16,000 square feet of proposed hangar development from consideration in the proposed plans to eliminate potential changes to the drainage system for the Harold Lane and Lexington Trace area. That is an area that goes into the field and into the trees there just south of the current T-hangar area. These concessions are significant and do create various degrees of limitation to the airport's operational and revenue-producing capabilities, while still allowing the airport to serve the community at a very high level of quality service. Across the state, looking at the different airports, we have a map here, and we looked at all the airports that are serving their various communities across the state. The red triangles represent airports and communities that have runways larger than Murfreesboro, longer than Murfreesboro. 75% of the airports in Tennessee are longer than Murfreesboro. That's 58 airports. 61% of the airports in Tennessee have a 5,000-foot runway or longer. 19 are equal to or shorter than Murfreesboro's airport. Some of those airports are built on islands. They can only go so far, or built on the top of a mountain, or built in between mountains. So they really are landlocked for several reasons. 90% of the Fortune 500 companies use general aviation airports to get to the communities where they do business. The Tennessee Aeronautics Division did a program just a few years ago, and it was called Tennessee Airports Mean Business. And it's a true statement. Shelbyville, Lebanon, Gallatin, and McMinnville have not experienced tremendous changes in their operations because they have a 5,000-foot runway or greater. Another concern that the Airport Commission has heard is that the extension of the runway will greatly increase the number of flight operations at the Murfreesboro Airport, and this will lower property values. The fact is that larger numbers of aircraft will not choose Murfreesboro as a place to land because of the runway extension. Pilots will choose to land here if they have business in Murfreesboro. Based on interest expressed by local airport users, it is anticipated that no more than 2 aircraft may locate or relocate because of the runway extension. The FAA, through its years of experience and studies, have developed a guideline of significance that general aviation airports with a number of operations fewer than 90,000 annually and fewer than 700 annual jet operations do not have enough of a significant impact on the community's property values to warrant a detailed study. A major contributing factor to the FAA's findings is found in the continued improvement in aircraft technology. FAA studies have proven that a majority of the turboprop and turbojet aircraft are quieter than some of the most popular single-engine piston aircraft. The existence of these FAA guidelines is one reason that it is so difficult to find economic studies and noise studies on general aviation airports. With 52,000 annual operations and 210 annual jet operations, which make up only 0.4% of our overall operations in 2008, the Murfreesboro Airport falls well short of the FAA guidelines and threshold. The R.A. Wiedemann and Associates Economic Impact Study came to that same conclusion, supported by the FAA guidelines. As confirmed by the R.A. Wiedemann and Associates study, without a significant number of additional forecasted operations well beyond any justifiable proposed growth rate, the runway extension will not have a negative impact on local property values. Typical annual growth rates for growing airports are anticipated to be around 1% per year. This is a breakdown of our operations. Total operations in 2008 was 52,000 operations. And an operation is any time an aircraft takes off or an aircraft lands. The majority, overwhelming majority, of our operations is the single engine, around 48,000. Our multi-engine aircraft, which are the multi-engine piston aircraft, was around 3,200. Our turboprop was 416 and turbojet 210. The growth rates required to meet the FAA's threshold for detailed study would need to be sustained for 20 years and be a rate of 2.79% for overall operations. And for jet operations, we would have to have 6.21% growth every year for 20 years to meet that threshold. An increase in overall operations from 52,000 to 90,000 annually and turbojet operations from 210 to 700 annually are not reasonable expectations of growth within any reasonable planning horizon for the Murfreesboro Airport or for any general aviation airport in Tennessee. The increase in flight operations projected due to the runway extension is minimal and would not change real estate values from their current position. The fact the airfield predating any significant residential development is that any impact from the airfield was already incorporated into real estate values at the time current owners purchased their property. Now, there are many positives to this airport layout plan, including the four main scoping areas that we talked about. Maintaining no change or improvement to the majority of the approaches and departures is exceptional. For your review, even with the runway extension, for the approach for runway 36 or aircraft landing to the north, there's no change. Departures to the north, runway 36, even with the proposed runway extension, there's no change. Departures to the south with the runway extension, runway 18, are improved. Aircraft will be higher as they depart airport property. Another thing that I'd like to point out as I go to the overhead is that with the extension, right now, aircraft on the shorter runway have oftentimes, when they pull out onto the runway, stop at the end of the runway, set their brakes, and run up the engine, which takes time and makes a lot of sound before they take off to get maximum power because of the short runway. In this case, with the longer runway, they can pull out onto the runway and in most cases be able to continue their taxi, go to full throttle, and continue down the runway without having to do that stop and go. Back to the presentation. On the north end of the airport, there'll be some change to the approach, but the north end is the most wide open area of the city. It is our best approach and best departure. Improved stormwater drainage system through the north end of the airfield with the construction of the extension of the taxiway and runway. This will improve the existing difficult terrain on the north end of the field as well. Improvements of the ramp in the terminal area will improve the flow of aircraft as they taxi in the ramp from parking and fueling areas. Updated and relocated fuel storage tanks and fueling systems locations have been identified. Location of future hangars identified. Improved runway lighting system and new separate building to house all the airfield lighting electrical equipment is included in the LP. Update to the airport overlay district with no significant impact to the community. Height restrictions will be of 250 to 350 feet over the north end of the community, where they already have some very restrictive residential and commercial height restrictions. The financing of the recommended projects. A majority of these projects, such as the proposed runway extension, will be funded through 95% state funding and 5% local funds. Even the state funding comes from revenues generated from the sale of aviation fuel in Tennessee. No state tax dollars are used. Other funding sources will come from the customers that enter into long-term land leases who may build their own hangar facility. Exceptions to this funding plan and formula may occur in the acquiring of the RPZ properties and terminal building development. Endorsements. The airport layout plan has been reviewed by a number of government agencies, along with several organizations, businesses, and individuals. A number of them have shared the opinion and stated their support of the proposed plans. Listed are a few of those: the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce, Middle Tennessee State University, Smyrna Rutherford County Airport Authority, Weiser Company, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, AOPA, National Business Aircraft Association, NBAA, and even Shuttle Commander Robert Hoot Gibson sent you a letter. In the City Code, the Airport Commission is charged to do several things. The first, the Airport Commission is to promote the orderly growth. They are to promote the orderly development and the orderly use of the airport. They are to promote public safety at the airport and around the airport. They oversee the operation of the airport and assure service to the citizens who use the airport, owners of airplanes located at the airport, and the traveling public who utilize the airport. The Airport Commission is to promote harmony between the citizens who reside near the airport and the people who use the airport. They are to cooperate with Middle Tennessee State University in the development and implementation of its aerospace program. The Airport Commission recommends a budget to the City Council and oversees compliance with that budget. And the Airport Commission is to cooperate with the Tennessee Department of Transportation, Division of Aeronautics, and the FAA in the development and use of the airport. I think you will agree with me that the Airport Commission has complied with their charge and applied each and every one of those items to every aspect of the airport layout plan and its planning process. In every aspect of the Airport Commission's business, it is about what is best for the community, what is best for Murfreesboro. From the airport's fuel prices, debt service retirement plan, lease agreements, the Airport Commission's focus is not on the airport exclusively. It is a commission that is focused on how this airport can effectively and efficiently service the community. From the beginning and throughout this planning process, the Airport Commission has done its best in a tremendous balancing act of demands and needs of the community, the state, and federal safety designs and standards, policies and procedures, and integrate modifications, limitations, and solutions to plans to address the issues and concerns raised by the airport customers and the neighbors of the airport. The Murfreesboro Airport Commission is confident that you will find that the proposed airport layout plan is a plan that is consistent with its 60 years of development of the airport and the airport's history of service to the community. The airport layout plan and the supporting documents show us how the Murfreesboro Municipal Airport can continue to effectively serve the entire community as it has for the last 60 years and continue, like our neighbor to the north on DeJarnett, be a good neighbor. Thank you. And I think Mr. Huddleston will close.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Like most of you, I was born here, and we all want very much to preserve the community that we have. The slides that we want to start with here are, we've been asked, how did we get here? How did the area in the north side of town develop? The first slide that we've got up is from 1958. You will see Clark Boulevard and Middle Tennessee State on it. You will see the Murfreesboro Airport in this area. Oops, let me slide it over a little bit, I guess. In this area right here. So the rooftops were not out there. The airport was built out in the county. You can see Northfield Boulevard is not even existing, and there's simply farmhouses out in that area in 1958. We go forward to 1978. You can see the runway situated right here. You can see Northfield Boulevard has appeared, and you can see DeJarnett has appeared. But then again, in 1978, we're still basically rural out around the airport. Farmhouses is basically what's there. 1987. This shot just happened to be taken when we went through the 200-foot extension in that time. You can see the runway and the 200-foot extension that was being put on. At that time, we were going from 3,700 to 3,900 feet. Again, you can see the beginning of Bradford Place, where I currently live, and there were, you might not be able to see well in your shot. This is the Bradford Place that there are streets beginning to go in, but no houses out there as of 1987. So I think that the picture that we paint there is how we grew on the north side of town. One other thing that I thought was very interesting, my wife came home with this presentation and said, do you know how, well, it didn't zoom out very well. Do you know how big aviation is at MTSU? And this is a publication that came out several months ago that features the Air Traffic Control Center on the cover of the MTSU Research, Discover, Innovate, Create brochure, which is really very telling of where aviation is at MTSU. As Chad pointed out, there's been a lot of talk about what will the runway change, how will it change our neighborhoods. There's a lot of smart people on both sides of this conversation, and we certainly don't want to diminish that. If you look to our west, you see Smyrna Airport at 8,000 feet. We don't have neighborhoods that are crying out in Smyrna. If you go to our north, you have Lebanon Airport at 5,000 feet, another smaller community with a 5,000-foot airport. If you go over to our east, you see McMinnville, 5,000 feet. No neighborhood problems there, another smaller community with a 5,000-foot runway. And then you go to our south, and the closest airport is Shelbyville, 5,500 feet, another smaller community with no outcrying of neighborhoods with problems from operations off of that. As the Airport Commission started looking at the whole project, we have gotten a lot of deterioration in the surface of our 3,900-foot current runway. We have deferred maintenance as long as we can. Our engineers and the state engineers both say that this is just really, we can't defer it any longer. You all have already approved the funding from our airport funds, and the state has also approved the project for a 2013 runway surface overlay. They will mill the surface and then repave with the same thickness and the same bearing weight. This is going to involve somewhere around a 2-week runway closure. One of the things that the Airport Commission is looking at is service to our tenants. We have 6 businesses on the airfield, and we don't want to disrupt their operations multiple times. So the runway extension makes sense to put in with the resurfacing project in 2013, and that's why now is so important. Airport Commission, all of us are very cognizant also of costs. In the resurfacing, it's a little over $2 million project. In the airport, the runway extension is a little over $2 million project. Mobilizations in each of those is not known because the bids haven't been let, but it's forecast to be somewhere around $100,000 mobilization. So we feel like we can easily save $100,000 by doing the 2 projects together. Plus, we don't have any cold joints in the runway where they butt up 2 different sections and 2 different ages of asphalt. Our city's forefathers were insightful in creating the various commissions that our city currently uses. They knew that you or whomever that was sitting on city council couldn't possibly study and involve yourselves with all the different aspects of golf courses and airports and parks and recreation and all of those things. And so we are very humbled to be a part of that. And Airport Commission has not always taken the popular road. Each year we raise rents, and even though 5 of us are aviators and there's a city council rep and then there's a neighborhood rep, that's not a popular thing to do, to raise rents when some of those people on council are paying rents at the airport. And so I think that's just a good example of we don't take the most popular road. As Chad said, our charge is to do what's best for the city. And we, the Airport Commission, I'm very proud that we take 100% of us have always voted for what's best for the city. There's other things that are unpopular among aviators. We just recently changed the frequency at the airport, and we got a lot of flack from a lot of aviators because they were going to have to change, and they didn't like that. So I say that to say that this commission is committed to our charge, and I'm very proud for that. And the Planning Commission, too, committed to their charge with overseeing what they did with their public hearing. And I'm proud to say that the Airport Commission recommended this airport layout plan unanimously. The Planning Commission voted 5-1 to recommend it. Another thing that's a barometer that in the years on Airport Commission is the city staff gets very involved in the details, the engineering, the planning, the legal, and we haven't heard any city staff person that was against the plan. So I'm very proud to present you a plan that has been through a lot of acid tests, and ask that you evaluate the facts. There will be a lot of emotions, and a lot of people are afraid of what might come, but please just evaluate the facts, and as you evaluate this airport layout plan, we appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Huddleston. Does that conclude the presentation from the city staff? Yes, ma'am. There may be questions from the council before we open the public hearing of the city staff. I had 2. What percentage of the operations, and I realize an operation is taken off and an operation is landing. That's 2. Is that
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes.
So if I go out and do 3 touch and goes, that's 6 operations. Mm-hmm. Is that correct?
That's correct. If you take off from Murfreesboro, we're always glad to see you come back and land.
Okay. So the old joke was we want to make sure and keep our takeoffs and landings even numbers.
That's right.
That's exactly right. Okay. So that was, I guess, the question that came to mind more often. But what is the percentage of operations that are associated with MTSU's Aerospace Department?
The studies that we've done in the past is anywhere between 40% to 60% of our operations are training.
40 to 60% are students. So those operations are generally based on the number of students in the program.
Absolutely.
So if you have more students in the program, you get more operations if you have fewer students in that program. And there are 2 other aspects of the MTSU Aerospace program, which are the maintenance and then the air traffic control. Is that correct?
Yes, and there's also technology is also another area out there that several of the students come out to the airport to take classes at their facilities on the airport campus.
Okay, so 40 to 60% are MTSU, and then the balance are either business or general aviation, recreation.
That's
flight.
correct. Mm-hmm.
All right, council members, I've asked my questions. You may have some before we open the public hearing.
I have several.
Yes, Ms. Harris.
Because this is all of the things that come to the city council is very important. When I ran, I promised to listen, speak up, and follow through. This is a subject that I'm not very well abreast on, but I have done a lot of research. I think a big part of any decision we make that's going to affect the city, I think we should bring the citizens in and get their comments. Before us, we have a petition with I don't know how many names against it. I wish I could see a petition showing how many were for it, but I'm going to take my emotions out of my decision, and I'm going to deal strictly with the facts. So I have some questions. And if you can't answer them, anybody you want to call on will be fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
That'll be fine.
Okay, and here again...
We are paying some consultants, so I'll try to defer to them.
Okay. And here again, I'm an amateur, so
right.
If I mispronounce something, you can correct me. Okay, let's go back. In August 2008, you said a letter came to the council and the city council approved a plan.
An airport layout plan.
Okay.
Yes. Mhm.
And at that time, a consultant was
Yes.
brought in.
Back in January, the Airport Commission, the City Council approved going out, the concept of going out and requesting us to go out and advertise and look for consultants to come on board and help us through the airport layout planning process. And then in August, after a long selection process, we brought to the City Council consultants
Okay.
to do that plan. And we were specific with our search from the very beginning of those 4 key factors of what we were going to include in that airport layout plan study.
Okay. Now, December 2010, it came back to the council.
Yes.
And this was the airport layout plan. And it was approved again by the council, right?
Yes, there was a key item in that meeting, and that was the runway alternative. It's the key step in the planning process. The consultants had spent a great deal of time at looking at the number of operations and the type of equipment, talking to our businesses, the university, to seeing what was needed. And developing that, the Airport Commission looked at a number of alternatives. Even though the runway is one strip of pavement, there's many ways that we can make that runway work with the certain criteria and lengths and things like that, and all the design criteria that the FAA and state require. The Airport Commission selected an alternative, the drawing for what the airport layout plan would be drawn around, the runway. And at that meeting, we presented that at the special joint meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, the layout plan, were there any stipulations as far as, was it with the understanding that automatically the runway would be approved when this layout plan was?
No.
No stipulations?
No, that's part of the process, and part of this process is to go ahead and you, as the City Council, the Airport Commission, has made a selection of drawings for that alternative. That went to the state after it went here, and to the FAA. We later then drew the rest of the airport layout plan, and there are a number of issues that the state or the FAA may say no to, or may say you need to change or adapt or anything. So no expectations that we would get it. It's a long process, and I guess that's why we're talking about starting in 2008, and we're now in 2012. It's a very long process. Several agencies are looking at it, and anywhere along the line, there could be an issue with how they drew it, or the concept, or the backup data that we've given them to support the drawing.
So now, if the council approves this, it's going to be passed again to the state and to the FAA, because the FAA has to approve the final plan. Is that correct?
Right now, we have coordinated with them. We've coordinated with the state, the Division of Aeronautics. The FAA has looked at it. We needed to bring this document to them, and then at last bring it to you to say, these agencies who make up all these regulations have reviewed this, and it meets all the criteria. Now, they've looked over it, they agree with it. Now, do we want to make this our airport layout plan for our community? So this is really the final step in the adoption process. If you should choose to adopt this, the mayor will sign a set of drawings, and we will pass that on to the Aeronautics Division, which it will go before the chief engineer with the Tennessee Aeronautics Division. He will sign it. That will go up, so many copies to the FAA, so many copies to the state, and it will be the official plan. When we have an airspace study, somebody wants to put up a cell tower or something like that, these plans with the airspace drawings are the official document for Murfreesboro. If we decide to build a facility, a hangar for MTSU, the FAA and the state could say, was it on your plan? Yes, it's on the plan. Yes, funding is available. So after this is really the final step in the review and approval of the airport layout plan.
Okay, let's address a few things that have been sent to us in emails. One big thing for the extension is safety. Let's talk about safety. Okay, on the scale from 1 to 10, with 10 being the absolute safest, where would you rate our airport right now?
Our airport is a very safe airport. Can we make it safer? Yes, we can. I believe that you always strive to improve things, and our airport is an excellent airport, but I think we can make it better. I think we can go to 11.
But on the scale right now,
Right now,
how safe, 1 to 10, how safe is our airport?
yeah.
Ms. Harris, I'm going to advise Mr. Gerke not to answer that. I really don't think it would be in the city's interest to speak to that, because there are no known safety problems, and you're asking him to say that there are in a way which could be adverse to the city's interests.
Okay, I'm sorry. The reason why I asked that, that's supposed to be one of the biggest things, safety. So I was just interested in,
I think it's kind of like our cars. We had seat belts. That was good. And now there's airbags. Is the old car any worse? But we've improved safety with our with our airbags. And this is one way we can improve the safety for the pilots that use it, for the passengers of those airplanes. And you can see that that's our charge, to
Okay.
improve safety.
and thank you, Ms. McGann. Correct me now if I ask something I shouldn't be asking. Thank me. Okay. Okay, I know you probably have addressed this. I've been hearing so much tonight. Did I hear you say approximately 52,000 flights
Operations, a landing or a takeoff.
within a 12-month period?
Yes, annually, yes.
Okay. So, of that 52,000, approximately, you can give a percentage, how many of those flights have actually overrun the strip there, the runway?
In my 18 years here at the airport, I've dealt with 4. There was a fifth incident that was questionable of whether the runway length was a factor. But there were definitely 4 instances where I was out at the end of the runway with an aircraft that had run off the end of the runway.
Okay, now, of those 4 out of 52,000,
That's 4 out of 18 years.
4 out of 18 years.
okay, 18 years, 4 that has actually overran the runway. How many of those 4 would you say is a possibility was a pilot's error and not necessarily the length of the runway?
The NTSB report will always say that the pilot was unable to maintain on the runway or something like that, maintain their aircraft on the runway. When they're out at the end of the runway and they're in the grass, and they could have, with a longer runway, you could determine that they could have made a stop on pavement, and you could have lessened that load of damage to the aircraft because there was more pavement, and given them that option. That's what we're looking at here today.
Okay, so
There were out of the 4, 3 of them had substantial damage to the aircraft, landing gear, things like that. Nobody was hurt, thank goodness, but there was substantial damage to the aircraft. 1 was lucky, and that was the last one on Mother's Day, where the gentleman went off the end of the runway and was able to maintain straight forward on the grass and didn't have any damage to the aircraft.
So that was 4 out of approximately 936,000.
Something, whatever, 18 times 52,000.
Right,
equals,
936,000, okay. All right,
And those are recorded. Now, there may be some that occurred that were never recorded. The person pulled the aircraft back onto the pavement.
I understand that.
Those are ones that I, alerted to.
And major airports also, I'm sure, have pilots that overrun the air strips, too.
I can only speak about Murfreesboro.
Okay. Speaking of Murfreesboro, Mr. Hudson referenced that there are other airports around us. I think he mentioned Smyrna, Shelbyville, McMinnville, that have the same type of airport, and there's no problem. Now, my question is, Smyrna, Shelbyville, and McMinnville, are they surrounded by residents like we are?
Lebanon has residents. Smyrna to the north has residents and around some of the areas of the airport. Shelbyville is growing area around there. There is more rural area there. McMinnville is pretty rural where their airport is located.
Okay, when the aircraft land on the runways, how much feet we have now?
We have 3,898 feet.
Okay, and let's say 1,000 feet is what is beginning to land. They can hit the 1,000 feet mark. Okay. If they hit the 1,000 feet mark, let's say amateur pilots will maybe go over and hit 1,500 feet. So that leaves, help me with my math, somebody.
Yeah, 2,500 left.
Okay.
Something like that.
Will that not be sufficient?
You throw in weather conditions, you throw in how fast they're coming in, winds, different things like that are all conditions that the pilots are landing in. It's never the same every time.
Okay.
So, again, one pilot talked about the margin of safety, another option for them, and that's what they're trying to improve is that margin.
Okay, so if it's approved for the 5,000 feet, okay, would that not also give the capability of more volume of traffic? Maybe not necessarily larger aircraft, but more volume, which would also increase the noise factor?
What I think part of the presentation that I want to point out there is that, yes, there could be some increased volume. We're looking at a 1% growth per year, which is pretty much in line with the FAA. The significant number that this body and this community would be concerned about is what the FAA has pointed out is the significant level of operations, and that's around the 90,000 mark. We are well short of that. And all these communities, we looked at the number of operations that are around the airports in Tennessee. There are very few that even get close to that as far as the general aviation airports. So once you reach that mark, that's where you have to do some, you're eligible to do some additional study, other things that you have to do to combat the sound levels from those aircraft, and we're nowhere close to that.
Okay, let's talk about noise. Decibels, your decibel level. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain what that means?
I'm going to use my consultant on this one
All right.
because he is more versed with decibels.
Okay.
And Tim already knows who I'm talking about.
You might introduce yourself again, please, to the council and to those who are present.
My name is Tim Haskell. I'm the Senior Aviation Planner for Hanson Professional Services, and our firm was retained to work with the Commission and develop the airport layout plan. A decibel is a logarithmic measurement of the intensity of a noise event. The best way to describe a decibel is that normal conversation between two people occurs at about 50 to 55 decibels. An increase of 10 decibels is a mathematical equivalent of a doubling of the intensity of the noise event. A typical single-engine aircraft that operates at Murfreesboro will operate in the range between 70 and 80 decibels as a single event, as it's measured on the ground. That is also true for the turboprops and the turbojets that operate at the airport. One of the things we look at when we look at noise events, and the way the federal government requires us to evaluate noise, it's a combination of the number of operations and the typical weather conditions at a particular airport. So the magic number as far as Murfreesboro is concerned, primarily because you are dealing with a significant number of like airplanes. you have 52 to 53,000 operations a year. 95% of those operations are single-engine or light twin piston engine aircraft. That's where your noise is generated from. It's a combination of the way we look at it is an annual average day. And the FAA's numbers, the FAA derives their numbers. That what is the level of significance for a general aviation airport? They have selected the 90,000 operation range or the 700 turbojet aircraft range based on their experience of where the annual noise contours would fall within an airport proper. And they recognize that until you reach that 90,000 number, then the noise levels of significance as defined by the federal government, which is 65 decibels annual average noise level, that level falls within the geographic boundaries of the runway itself. And until that noise contour, as it's called, starts to leave the confines of that runway, then the noise impact on the community is defined by the federal government as not significant. I guess what I tried to do just now is anticipate your next question, so I went on a little bit further. But
you see where I'm going, right?
Yes. The easiest way to define the decibel is that when you look at a decibel scale, the difference between 70 and 80 decibels is a doubling of the noise intensity.
Okay, so when you started off, I understood you to say, well, the aircraft that we use, like the Diamond that MTSU uses for training, the decibel number on that?
I don't know, is the answer. We use basically because all single-engine piston aircraft are relatively the same. The Diamond may be in the high 60s, 68, 67. It's an extremely quiet aircraft. A Cessna 172 or a Cessna 150, which is the traditional common training aircraft at most airports, those airplanes operate in the mid-70s. So there's about a 50%, it's about a 50% quieter aircraft.
Okay, the Diamond that MTS uses, it's within a range of 69 to 73.
It's probably in the high 60s to very low 70s.
Okay, and then the King Air, it has like 79.2%.
Depending on the location of the recipient on departure, using the standard measuring location, which is about 1,200 feet off the end of the runway, a King Air operates in the 78 to 79 decibel range.
Okay, and according to the FAA, the average plane certificated in the United States, the small engines, propeller planes, they are anywhere from 70.2% to 77%. So we're in that range.
Yes, decibels, not percent.
Decibels.
Decibels, not percent. Yes.
Decibels. Okay. So we're looking at, I'm hearing a range in Murfreesboro between 60 and 80. 60% is like a conversation in a restaurant or background music. Okay. Then when you get to 70%.
Decibels.
Decibels. Okay. Mayor, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
All right.
Just want to make sure everybody else.
Okay. Whatever I'm saying, I mean decibels, okay? 70%. We're talking about living room and a vacuum, your TV on in your living room and a vacuum cleaner, the noise of that.
Right.
And then when you get to your 80, not going to pronounce that word, but you know what I'm talking about. You're talking about hearing a garbage disposal or a dishwasher. Now, the difference between 70 decibels and 60 and 70, it actually, like you said, doubles. Okay, so dealing with noise factor. And that was the point. I'm just trying to understand this.
Right. May I put it in a different perspective?
Yes.
The typical house in Murfreesboro Granted, I will concede the fact the typical house in Murfreesboro with all windows closed has a noise attenuation factor somewhere between 38 and 45 decibels, depending on the structure of the windows. A typical aircraft that takes off from the Murfreesboro Airport at 80 decibels, inside the home, the noise level would be below 55 decibels, which is lower than the normal conversation taking place in that home. And I say the reason the FAA uses conversational speech is because that includes watching of television or talking on the telephone and those sorts of things. So a part of the equation, now granted, in a neighborhood where people are outside and the aircraft goes over at 80 decibels, it is loud enough to interfere with conversation. If in many situations inside the home, the noise level would not be to a point where it would qualify or even be recognized as a significant event by the federal rules and regulations.
One weekend, I went out in 100-degree weather. I think that's the weekend we had 103 degrees and 105 in that area, all around where the airport is, Bradford, North Woods, Arsman Lane, all that. I actually knocked on 202 doors, and I talked to people that were for and against. And since then, I think I've talked to approximately total 300 people. And one big factor I'm hearing is the noise. So, and I'm in my research that I've done on your decibel, at night, it is saying that it's either the sound of a vacuum cleaner running, a garbage disposal, or a loud music. And that's the example the FAA has given of these three categories. So when we're talking about the future, where, and Mr. Gerke, you may can answer this, where are we going? I mean, if we increase the runway now, where are you going in the future? And if so, how long? Are we going to keep expanding here? Or are we going to want to move out? Where are we going?
Well, before I give up the microphone, if I may take a crack at that. One of the reason I asked permission to do that is there's been a great deal of discussion, not only with the Airport Commission, but with the Planning Commission and with the community about the forecast that is inside the airport layout plan. The Federal Aviation Administration for the last 5 years has not been optimistic about the growth of general aviation. They predict that general aviation will grow at a less than 1% per annum rate. They do forecast that on a national scale, the operations of turbojet aircraft will grow at a 3.5% per annum rate. During our studies, there was no indication from companies that operate turbojet aircraft that there was a requirement for a longer runway for them because they were not demanding access for more operations. The purpose of the runway extension justification that was written was solely based on the demand and the ability of existing operators to operate at total efficiency of the aircraft that they own and operate, and at the same time meet the needs of the largest tenant that you have at your airport. There was no indication in any of our documentation that there is a unmet demand for continued access or increased access in your airport. We used a growth rate that was a little bit higher. We used a 1% growth rate, a little bit higher than the national, The FAA says general aviation will grow at 0.75 to 0.9% per annum. We used a 1% growth rate. There is no indication in our studies that that was an unreasonable number. So,
looking at the design standards for the runway also, the 5,000 is what fits on the property, and you couldn't go any longer with that and still maintain the current property lines.
Okay. Does someone man the airport 24 hours, like at night when the planes are flying? Is there anyone there?
No. No. It's the airport is open, but there is not personnel there necessarily through the night. MTSU does keep dispatchers there to a certain hour, but they're not there all night.
Okay, so with no tower, what about?
This is a non-towered facility. There are no air traffic
So at
controllers
night, I mean, planes kind of on their own?
Yes. Even at some towered facilities, the tower may not be operated at night.
Okay. And I want to thank you, Mr. Gerke and
Mr. Haskell.
Ms. Haskell. You all educated me very much, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Haskell, would you go through those points? You said there was no demand for growth at the airport, so there was nobody's asked us to, that they're going to have more operations there. Second was to maximize efficiency of current operators. Is that correct?
right. For example, there are some aircraft that currently operate at the airport, and those are documented in the purpose and need for the airport layout plan and the justification. There are some operators that operate aircraft where they have to take a weight limit on the airplane because of the length of the runway. So it's to allow those aircraft operators to identify and utilize their equipment to their full efficiency. It would be like buying a 9-passenger SUV and removing a seat so that you never have 9 people in it, you only have 6. And it's not an efficient way for them to operate. One of the things, and I'll just quickly say, that one of the things that Chad indicated that this document has been through the coordination of the FAA and the state. One of the things that an airport must do, an airport sponsor or an airport owner, in order to put a runway extension, particularly a runway extension, on an airport layout plan, is show the justification for that. The justification from an FAA standpoint is you must identify the potential for 500 operations annually by the type of aircraft that needs that runway length. In your particular case, 400 of those airplanes were already operating at the airport. And when MTSU indicated to us their intent to buy an aircraft that needed the 5,000-foot runway length, the addition of those operations, when their intent to eliminate the King Air from their fleet and add the Jetstream 31, those operations anticipated by that aircraft put the airport over that, I would say, the magic 500 annual operation number, with only an increase of 125 operations a year by the aircraft type that needs that runway length. That was the justification, and that is the justification that's described in the purpose and need in the documentation for that runway. That's what was coordinated with the FAA and the state, and they concurred with that information.
Thank you. Other questions from the council? Mr. Gilley, do you have some question? Mr. Smotherman? Mr. Washington? Vice Mayor? Anybody? Mr. Young? All right. Are there any other questions then before we open the public hearing? Seeing none, I'll now open the public hearing. Anyone wishing to speak for or against this 2012 airport layout plan? This would include the entire plan, not just the runway extension, but the entire plan. Please step to the microphone and give us your name and address.
Hi, I'm Steve Murphy. I live in Bradford Place. I've actually submitted to each of the council members the petitions against the runway, nearly 300 signatures. So thank you for receiving that, and ask for that to go on record as 300 people opposed to the runway. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I really do appreciate your service, and Ms. Scales-Harris, 200 doors on a hot weekend. Wow, that's above and beyond, so thank you. I am opposed to the airport layout plan. As you can tell from the petitions, we are not satisfied that the airport has answered our concerns, because we believe that they have not, with all due respect to the comments by Mr. Gerke. Please understand that this isn't an us versus them. We're not in opposition to MTSU or a better Murfreesboro. In fact, the sense of pride that I feel for the contribution that MTSU makes to this community is only enhanced, and that is a sentiment that has been expressed by the majority of the people that I've spoken with on this matter. I think that we can say that based on census data of 2.59 people per house according to 2010 census data, and then the number of residences within 2 miles of the airport according to the U.S. Post Office, excluding P.O. boxes and commercial addresses, that the equivalent of nearly half of the population of Murfreesboro resides within that 2-mile radius. So there's a lot of people that are going to be affected if we extend this runway. I think that the majority of our concerns can be expressed in three different categories: quality of life, which includes safety and noise; the financial impact we believe will happen on the homeowners. We've already had instances where people coming into town from some realtors said, "Don't take me anywhere near the airport. I don't want to look at it. I've heard what's going on there. I don't want to live anywhere near it." We've had people who have sold their homes because of this conversation. I've had many sleepless nights myself, and a number of sleepless nights over this very issue. Also, we believe that representatives of the airport should be more forthcoming and less dismissive about the negative impacts on the neighbors. I don't believe that they've been quite, they've not presented things quite as well as what they should and how that we would be impacted. At night, before I go to bed, one of the last things I do is to remove my hearing aids. I wear hearing aids both ears, and I can still be disturbed by the planes taking off at night. So we talk about decibels, but when everything's quiet at night and the planes are taking off, that's when it's disturbing my sleep. And Mr. Gerke said that insignificant amount of operations occur at night, only about 10%. Well, that's 5,200 in a year, 14 a night. I can tell you, I've done the math, 14.24, and that's significant for me when it does disrupt my sleep, and it does. Again, my hearing aid's out. Another issue that we believe has not been stated correctly, we look at the prioritization list of the capital improvement plans for the airport, and one of the key arguments that was made was the appearance of Murfreesboro, the terminal. Yet, when we look on the prioritization list, it's number 11 and 12 out of 13 priority items on where we would want what we want for our capital improvement projects. The economic impact study by R.A. Wiedemann and Associates, if you look at that, it is extremely biased. You can look at their website. They advertise. One of their statements for their products is that they make it more difficult for the opposition to present their side of the story. So it's definitely a biased study. I don't think that it could be presented as an unbiased study to the council. It's interesting that there's no data to indicate the impact of real estate prices, but we can find 5,000-foot runways in 4 nearby cities that we can talk about how there's not much of an increase in flights. I think the word was tremendous, which that can vary from a few to quite a bit. I guess that's relative, right? Also, FAA Order 5100.39A, I believe I have that order correct, would say that the runway extension is a capacity issue, not safety. And the documentation that was presented for the justification for the airport layout plan doesn't mention safety. It actually, and if Mr. Haskell said that there's no demand for growth, then again, I'm questioning, why are we going to spend this money to do this? I think that for the projected increase in flights, that would equate to, over the next 10 years, to about $800, $900. Well, let's go with operation, $400 to $500 subsidy per operation, assuming that they would actually use that additional runway. This would bring the runway 1,102 feet closer to my bedroom window. I don't want it. The growth of Murfreesboro has more than doubled in 20 years. So what's going to happen in 20 more years? How much more is going to grow around the airport? You've been asked to remove emotion from this. I ask you to please consider emotion. Please consider how this is going to affect me. Again, I've had many sleepless nights, and I can't count them on one hand since this began in November of last year when I came to the first public hearing. The mention was, the decibel level inside the house was at, 45, 55 or something like that. Well, I don't always stay in my house. I do live outdoors sometimes and enjoy being out on the deck. I'm not in the house 24/7, as most people aren't. There's not been documentation presented that this is a safety concern. I do understand that there may be a need for safety issues. If we look at what occurred on Mother's Day and take into consideration the plane ran off the end of the runway, I wonder if that couldn't have been pilot error, if maybe they didn't overshoot somewhat, because we were able to land a 737 on the runway a few years back. Again, they're talking about making the critical aircraft Jetstream 31. If I'm not mistaken, that stopped production in the early 90s with less than 400 manufactured. Why are we making a 1990s model or older aircraft our critical aircraft? I just don't understand it. Again, I would ask that you please reject the airport layout plan. We've not been given viable solutions and alternatives. It's not been presented as if there's room for compromise. I think that's a discredit to the city of Murfreesboro. I think that the city of Murfreesboro should be looking at this in terms of how we can compromise and make something that is viable for the residents, the aviators, and make a better Murfreesboro all the way around. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We have some electronic devices. Thank you very much.
Good evening. My name is John Black. I live at 106 Trundle Street, Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and I'm the executive director at Smyrna Airport. And as a citizen and colleague in the aviation community, and on behalf of the Smyrna Rutherford County Airport Authority, I'd like you to strongly consider this project for your support. Murfreesboro Airport studied this tremendously, and I understand the comments and concerns. They're understood, but they've also been thoroughly addressed through the environmental assessment process of the FAA, and as Mr. Gerke said, back to 2008. So this has undergone a lot of study during that time. Also, the engineers who've assisted in the planning and design come highly recommended and do a lot of projects not only around the state but around the country. Runway extension does not change the category of the airport. It's going to remain a B2, and it does not, more importantly, it does not increase the weight limitations. And that's really what determines what is going to be landing at and taking off in Murfreesboro. Thereby will not change the type and size of aircraft. The percentage of jet aircraft at Murfreesboro is less than 1% of their total operations. And studies have concluded that the noise footprint, as pointed out earlier, does not increase, and that the safety of the airport does, in fact, increase. The matter of lengthening the runway will not create a new gateway of aircraft that are just waiting to come in and operate at Murfreesboro. It will accomplish the goal of the Murfreesboro Airport by adding a margin of safety needed, adding to the quality of the training by MTSU, aerospace students, and really another important aspect that hasn't been talked about a lot tonight is adding to our toolbox for recruitment of businesses to Rutherford County. I know that Mr. Gerke could probably go down a long list of household names of companies that come into our communities on our airport, through our airports. It's a tremendous economic engine for our community. We're fortunate to have Murfreesboro Airport, and it's a vital part of making Rutherford County one of the best places for aviation in the state. It's an award-winning airport. Airports are like interstates. Communities that have quality transportation prosper over those that do not. This project has been planned for years, and it's time to do what is best for our community and Murfreesboro Airport. A compromise really does not accomplish what Murfreesboro and Rutherford County need for our future. So I urge you to approve the airport layout plan, enhance the Murfreesboro Airport, and move forward with this project. And I would also like to submit a letter for the record from the Airport Authority, the Smyrna Rutherford County Airport Authority, signed by the Board of Commissioners, Mr. Michael Woods, Chairman, Ms. Helen Colvin, who's here tonight, Vice Chairman, Graham Coates, Commissioner, Steve Harrison, Commissioner, and Clyde Jones, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Give that to Ms. McGannon. Thank you.
My name is Bob Sokolsky. I'm a Bradford Place resident underneath Murfreesboro Airport traffic patterns.
Could you give
And
your
I strongly
address,
support
please? Your address.
the runway 2615 Kelly Close.
Thank you.
I strongly support not only the entire project, but specifically the runway extension. The reasons for my support are scientific, based on data, particularly my expertise as an engineer at Cessna Aircraft, where I designed avionics, including engine and propeller controls, and performed extensive aircraft noise measurements. I've written papers demonstrating the benefits of general aviation to the community and business, and for many years I flew on corporate aircraft for company purposes. A few weeks ago, I was sitting on my deck when a loud twin-engine airplane departing Murfreesboro flew overhead. The key factor was not the airplane, but that my neighbor across the street, about 75 to 100 feet away, was mowing his lawn. Since I'm an expert in aircraft noise, my ear is trained to make good approximations to what acoustics instrumentation would quantify. This is similar to hearing your favorite singer on the car radio and notching up the volume a bit to clearly hear it above other noise. Just that I've done that with airplanes and confirmed it scientifically with instrumented measurements. Singers and musicians control loudness by ear all the time. It's very valid. Let me go on. Since the sound emitted from the lawnmower was not only simultaneous, but of the same spectral character as that of the airplane, analysis was quite easy. The lawnmower, despite buffering by full-grown spruce trees, was 2 to 3 times louder than the airplane. Further, the airplane was pretty well gone in 30 to 40 seconds, while the lawnmower roared away for 30 to 40 minutes. Technical literature showed that a person outside a house and about 50 feet from the road will experience passing truck and motorcycle traffic to be 4 to 30 times the loudest possible takeoff sounds of a typical business jet measured at the FAA specified distance of about a quarter mile. That's about Bradford Place distance from the loudest noise before that jet cuts back power. Community response to noise is the term used in technical literature regarding noise from freeways, manufacturing, airports, etc. It's a means of determining annoyance to people and considers a range of sounds and a diversity of people. In community response studies, you get outcomes that range from people who couldn't care less to those who will never be satisfied. It's the way we are as people. As regarding safety, professional pilots are highly and continually trained. This is the difference we're talking about with jet pilots, with corporate pilots. They have a superb safety record, and it's safe. And at Cessna, I've witnessed them many a time in emergency conditions in test airplanes. General aviation accidents you hear about are typically the average weekend flyers and not the corporate pros. Where business aircraft are concerned, bigger is not louder. Further, business aircraft have a smoother sound signature than single-engine aircraft and are up and away much faster. Projected air traffic will not be louder than present air traffic, and it will be less noisy than other sounds common in our community. The extension will be good for Murfreesboro, for business, and for jobs. It will not be harmful to Bradford Place. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Mario Aguirre. I live in Bradford Place, A15 Judson Close.
A15
Judson
Close. Thank you.
Yep.
You might pull the microphone down a little bit.
Is that because of my Bailey? Or?
No. No.
I didn't like that.
My wife is 5 feet tall. I've learned that.
Oh, I'm 6. Well, anyways, I'm here because I'm really opposed to the lengthening of the runway. I don't think we need it. Why not? Because there are some other places nearby, like only 11 miles, Smyrna, where if they need bigger planes, they can land it over there. Over there they got 2 runways. I looked at it on Google. One was 8,900 feet long. The other one was almost a mile. So, for that reason, I don't think we need to do any expense when we have something so close that we can use. Secondly, I was reading this fantastic thing that you guys put, and they go, I don't know, what's the people that did the story, okay? The bias story. And they mention a company called Weiser. The Weiser don't want to come here because of the length of the runway. So, I look on the web, who's Weiser? They are in Northfield. They got 150 employees. They got a bunch of openings in Afghanistan right now. Not interested. I'm an engineer also. So I said, why do they need to come here on a big airplane? I don't see a reason, okay? I start reading, and I see from the website, and it says here that they have various events at each site through the year. They go to different, where they have offices. And they come here to the Middle Tennessee State University because they have a tailgate that they like to attend. I don't think to attend a tailgate, we need to be accommodating these people. Basically, that's my opposition to the project. Again, it's a lot of noise. I don't care what the fellow with the calibrated ear has, but it's very noisy. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Ben Tankard. I live at 2271 Alexander Boulevard, better known as Tank or Big Ben. I live in the big house on Alexander, and it was the only house there for a while. It's about 13,000 square feet, 3 floors, 3 patios, a little lake in the back. And when they built it, it was the only house on that street. And then they came and built a whole lot of smaller houses around it. So if there's anybody that can complain about property values, it's me. But I'm a big boy, and we're all big boys and girls. And the airport was there before me. When I moved into that house, I knew the airport was there. To be honest with you, I used the airport being there to help negotiate my price way down. And so I can't come back and renege now and talk about property values when the presence of the airport actually helped me get a $3 million house for pennies on the dollar. So thank God for the Murfreesboro Airport. I look at it from the standpoint of progress. I love this city. I came to Tennessee after I left the NBA with an injury. Used to live in Brentwood. Most people over there are pretty snooty. But I moved to Murfreesboro. Murfreesboro, I just love the people here. It's a very progressive city, and to me, the city has outgrown the airport. The advancement of Murfreesboro, it's been documented nationwide. In fact, I'm an aircraft owner. I own 2 airplanes, and I am a recording artist, and I get to travel around the country about 150 times a year, 150 different airports a year I fly into to go do my concerts. and my pilot who works for me, Brian, flies with me. And I tell you, almost 90% of the time I fly into a different city, it's a smaller city than Murfreesboro, and the runway is much larger. In fact, we were in Ardmore, Oklahoma last week, and they have two airports. Population 20,000, Ardmore, Oklahoma, and they've got a 9,000-foot runway and another airport with 5,000-foot runway. Me and Brian mentioned this to the airport manager, what we were going through, and the guy looks at me and says, "You only have 3,800 feet? What is wrong with Murfreesboro?" I said, "Well, I'll ask him next Thursday." And so I believe we already have the car. We're just adding the seatbelt to a car that already exists. We've already outgrown this runway. Let's come up in time and let's add this whole extension and the whole advancement. I think for a non-pilot to make an assessment about safety regarding the longer runway is equivalent to a husband telling their pregnant wife, labor pains are no big deal. Thank you very much.
Let's don't add to or detract from any of our speakers today. Thank you.
My name is Andy Downs. I'm at 1756 Cozumel Court. I've been in aviation, for 20 years professionally. Kind of pedigreed in the business, so to speak. I've operated in about 3 continents and about 8 different countries, and I've only had to come to Murfreesboro one time as a commercial operator over 20 years. And it's not because of the runway length. It was because we just didn't need to go here. It was just that simple. Unlike a car where you may choose a lot of different routes, there's only so many airports in the world. And you either need to go there or you don't. It's not, aviation is an esoteric environment. It's hard to understand completely unless you're involved with it. One of the things I think has been left out of the conversation is that aviation as an industry is a proactive industry that looks at safety. It's not waiting for a big disaster to occur before it tries to improve the safety procedures. Or it's the environment that would allow a safer operations. And all the time, we're looking at how do we do things better? How do we do things safer? How do we not get in trouble with the FAA? And that's something that a lot of industries and professions wait until there's some huge problem before they revisit, well, you know, that was brought up a few years ago, and we just didn't do anything about it. And I think you need to consider that for the future. This is not going to increase at all, well, maybe 1%, but it's not going to increase the activity in this area. It's just going to make it safer. And again, understand from an aviation point of view, we always want to do things safer. We're always looking to do things better so that we can protect the community. We can protect the environment that we operate in. And I just want you to consider that as you go forward, that you know, those are our concerns. And I do appreciate, you know, the citizens that live around the airport. I've seen a lot of moronic things done by airports over 20 years. This is not one of them. This is one of the better moves I've seen. And I've spoken against some airport developments up in Niagara Falls, where I had an operation. They were going to destroy some environment that they did not need to do. This has been very thoroughly and carefully thought out. And I think there's an irrational exuberance that exists unnecessarily from some of the hype that's going on. And I appreciate your time. I understand you've got a tough decision, but going forward is the right decision. Thank you.
Thank you.
Evening, Mayor, Council. My name is John Peruzzi. I live at 3048 North Thompson Lane. I'm right under the left crosswind departure from runway 36, so I see airplanes go over me all the time. I was born in Murfreesboro. I've lived in LA for quite a while. I've finally relocated back to home. I'm a pilot, and I wanted to stand here and actually maybe answer some of Ms. Harris's questions. I am that user that they're talking about, why the runway needs expanding. I have an aircraft based at Murfreesboro Airport, and I fly out of there with my wife and my children, all of whom are here, and I call it the pucker factor. Flying out of Murfreesboro Airport is probably, to me, I'm not going to say it's dangerous, but it's definitely worrisome for me. On a hot day, Ms. Harris, you talked about 102 degrees. Well, I've had days 102 degrees that we couldn't fly because that is outside the safety margin. And we actually have delayed leaving for trips or business because of that restriction. The increase in the runway length does three great things for me: safety, safety, and safety. I cannot stress enough what this will do for safety. It gives, and again, the previous speaker spoke eloquently about if you're not a pilot, it's kind of hard to understand. But to those of us, an extended runway in Murfreesboro does not mean I go fly around a lot more. It means that I have a way out. I have a safety margin. We have longer distances to stop. We have choices on takeoff for boarding. A 3,900-foot runway with my aircraft, which is not a jet or a turboprop, is not long enough for an aborted takeoff. And that affects my feeling of safety every time I use this airport. This is actually the shortest runway I fly into. As I've gotten older, and most of you can attest to the same thing, as you get older, you get a little bit more conservative in the risk you take. And I relocated back to Murfreesboro because of the wonderful community it is. MTSU, one of the biggest college in Tennessee, university in Tennessee, which has one of the best aviation programs in the country, is right here, and we have a 3,900-foot runway. As to the pilot community, that's kind of a joke. It would be like having a one-lane country road to get to Murfreesboro. It just doesn't even make sense. But honestly, it's safety, and a lot of people who may have spoken already or may speak later who is not in aviation and they're not really sure if they understand it or they get it, I will tell you that safety margin is huge to every pilot. But what does it offer them? A lot of people think that runway is not for me. I don't use it. But you may in a disaster time. Runways are used for medical evacs. I mean, if there's a tornado, a storm, anything that's life-saving event. The people in these communities that have been hit with earthquakes are cheering the airport and all the volunteer pilots. As the previous speaker said, the pilot is a very proactive community. I'm a member of Angel Flight. We fly medical evac patients to places they need to go to get specific care. And with this short of a runway, it's hard to take on those passengers. It really is. So I'm here in support of in really dire support of the lengthening of this runway for the safety of the runway. Ms. Harris had one other comment. I just also want to address that. You talked about more traffic, and I thought it's still one runway. In fact, the fact that it's longer means each operation, on the rollout, which is no power, no sound, might even take a few more seconds. So if anything, less airplanes could land on this runway when it's longer because people are going to be on it a little bit longer, and of course in the quiet operation. But you can't. It's not doubling. We're not doubling the runway numbers. We're just increasing the length for safety, and that's really all it is. So I stand here in support of the lengthening of the runway in Murfreesboro. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Paul Neely. I live at 1419 Shagbark Trail. I'm a lifetime resident of Murfreesboro. Born here, I was raised on Pitts Lane, which was in the downwind pattern of the airport over 30 years ago. I now live in the same pattern. I hear the same noise that all my neighbors in Bradford Place and other surrounding neighborhoods hear. I'm also a professional aviator. I fly for United Parcel Service. I personally use the airport at Murfreesboro very little in the last 20 years, just a very few operations, to use your term. But I've also seen the struggle over the decision to lengthen this runway come up several times since I've been in aviation, which is now coming up on 30 years. You could have 99 out of 100 professional aviation people could come up and stand up here and they're going to tell you exactly the same thing. This runway extension is about safety. It is about safety and not about increased operations, although the city might benefit in the future from the decision of a corporation to locate a business here or a factory here. For 12 years, I flew as a corporate pilot, one of the guys that were flying those corporate jets into small airports like this. And I was involved in decision-making with top executives of the company about where to locate new facilities and where to acquire new facilities. And the access was always a consideration. One of my neighbors mentioned that, well, Smyrna's right down the road. That's true, but a decision to locate in this community, Smyrna's not close enough. An executive's time, the reason he has an airplane is because he's trying to save time. He doesn't want to land in Smyrna and then drive, 20 or 30 minutes down here. So in the future, a longer runway may help make it a corporation make a decision to locate here. But the decision at this point is not about that. It's about safety of current operators. I appreciate the person who spoke before me talked about the takeoff abort decision. Overruns on runways are typically not landing incidents; they're takeoff incidents, where an engine fails on takeoff, or a deer runs out in front of an airplane on takeoff, and the airplane has to stop. The more runway that's available, obviously, the safer the operation is going to be. So especially when you're talking about light twin-engine airplanes or heavy twin-engine airplanes, which several operate out of Murfreesboro, that is the prime consideration. It's not landing. It's the ability to take off. And like he said, as the heat increases, then that becomes a more and more critical factor. The other issue and I know that most of my neighbors are concerned about is noise. But I think what we've seen tonight is we're not talking about an increase in noise. The noise that you're hearing now is not changing. If you're irritated by one of those diamonds taking off, they're still going to be taking off, except for the fact that for those of you who live on the south end of the runway, in the Northfield area, then because they're taking off further away from the neighborhood, they're going to be higher above that neighborhood, and therefore the noise and decibel levels are going to be lower. So for those who are concerned about noise on the south end, this is an improvement. This is a gain in the noise area. I also agree that I'm much more concerned, being a citizen that does live in the noise footprint of the airport, I'm much more concerned about leaf blowers at 7 a.m. And maybe we should organize, for an ordinance against that. I'm not concerned about what we have, the noise levels we have now. I think they're reasonable, especially for the impact and benefit that MTSU and the other business uses of the airport bring to the community. But the other thing I also want to suggest to the council and also to the other people who are concerned about noise, because communities all over the world are worried about noise. I work for UPS. We fly at night. Big airplanes make lots of noise. And we're always concerned about that and the impact that we have on those communities. There's places that we can't operate as an airline unless we follow very strict noise abatement guidelines. And this council could always, in the future, impose its own noise abatement regulations on the traffic at the airport. For example, you could say, no turbine-powered operations after 9 p.m. or whatever time you wanted to set. We could still go forward with the plan to build and extend this runway, which is a good decision, especially since it's 95% funded. But if noise becomes an issue, if it did become an issue in the future, we can address that then. This is not something that can't be dealt with in the future. And so I encourage you to pass the airport layout plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
If we could go to the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chad. My name is David Swindler. I live at 1714 Wiltshire Drive, Murfreesboro. I'm a retired professional engineer, a pilot, aircraft owner, user of the airport for over 25 years. I want to discuss with you the relation of aircraft engine failure upon takeoff. As was pointed out, a majority of the operation is a single-engine aircraft, and as a result of having only one engine, the failure of that engine is going to require that aircraft to ultimately come to the earth again. If the engine fails before takeoff, there's always the opportunity of the aircraft coming to rest on the airport tarmac. If the aircraft takes off and is off the ground a certain distance, he still has the ability to re-land the aircraft and possibly suffer some damage. Where the safety issue comes in that I want to discuss is where the aircraft engine fails at some elevation, and then the aircraft has to come to ground outside of the airport area. We investigated the aircraft losing an engine anywhere from 50 feet up to 2,000 feet and made some evaluations. If we're taking off south, we have the cemetery, which provides a very good place for a pilot to aim his airplane, and he might have a successful arrival there, not being concerned about what else he might do there at that cemetery. But it does provide a place and was considered into the safety evaluation I made. So if we are having an aircraft that is taking off and having an engine failure, there are 3 different procedures that the pilot might take. He might take a straight-ahead approach and find some safe place to arrive if he can, or he might decide to take an approach to do a teardrop return to the airport area and possibly put the airplane on the runway again. This is a teardrop approach, and then there's one very similar to that, which would be an S-turn, which causes a little closer arrival in some instances. So with these 3 different approaches, we also included the 2 different lengths of runway, and we were provided an array of data showing what would happen and would compare the results according to a color code that we've used showing in this data. The y-axis is the number of feet off the ground at the point that the aircraft engine fails, and then in the colored area is the distance from the south end of the runway that the aircraft might arrive. We then evaluated the colored areas. Some are safe areas, some are not so safe areas. And the conclusion of the study is that safety is improved in a given altitude in 6 different instances of altitude. The teardrop reversal provides 4 instances that were not previously available with only 3,900 feet, but is available with 5,000 feet. In this process, it prevents damage to the neighborhood property in 5 different instances and enables arrival on the airport property in also 5 instances. So a longer runway does, in fact, by calculation, improve safety to both the pilot and property owners. And later I will answer any question you might have about this.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Ferrara, and I'm the chair of the Aerospace Department at MTSU. These folks stole most of my thunder here tonight about safety, but I'm going to say a few things. I speak only for MTSU and only for the Aerospace Department. To clear up one misconception that seems to continually rise, lengthening the runway is not going to result in MTSU increasing the size of the aircraft we operate. We are not looking for larger airplanes. 5 years ago, we would have preferred to buy a Jetstream. The insurance company said it was not feasible on the runway, so we went with the King Air 200. We're happy with the King Air 200. When the time comes to either replace the King Air or upgrade the King Air, there's no reason why we wouldn't look at another King Air. It's a very good airplane. It served us well. So there was an article in the paper this morning that made it sound like if the runway were extended, we were going to run out tomorrow and buy a Jetstream 31. That's not true. The second thing is, from our perspective, the major consideration, again, you've heard this all night, is safety. We train kids, all right? We train kids who start from 0 flying hours and go through to end up being the people flying the airplanes you folks fly on when you travel. Think about that for a little while. Some of our students indeed make mistakes. That's what our instructors are there for. We try to prevent mistakes. Any increase in the margin of safety benefits us, it benefits our program. There's an old saying in aviation, and I can identify with old. I've been flying for almost 40 years. I know I look 21 also, but I'm 67. I've got over 5,000 flying hours in a number of different types of airplanes, so I do know a little bit about flying in aviation. And the old saying that comes to mind that I learned very young is the altitude under your wing and the runway in front of you are your best friends. The idea of an engine failure on takeoff is not that far-fetched. There have been engine failures at Murfreesboro over the years. I experienced one myself a number of years ago and landed back on the runway. That's not to say that a longer runway will absolutely prevent all runway excursions, as we call them. We don't call them incidents or accidents. They're excursions. When someone drives off the end of the runway, whether it be pilot error or not, they're still off the end of the runway, and that's a runway excursion. We are not going to be increasing our flying hours if the runway is extended. The length of the runway has no impact whatsoever on the number of operations MTSU will have. What determines our operations is strictly enrollment. Enrollment is based largely on the economy. I can show you data where our flight hours and operations have decreased in the last 2 years because the economy caused our enrollment to drop. Am I happy with that? No. Do I want it to increase again? Yes. Do I want the runway extended? Yes. And again, I say it's a safety factor, and I mentioned this before the Planning Commission. I don't want to be the person who has to call a family and say, I hate to tell you this, but your child was in an accident, ran off the end of Murfreesboro runway. That's not the job I want. So I'm very much in favor of the extension. MTSU Aerospace is unanimously in favor of the extension. MTSU itself is in favor of the extension. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, excuse me. My name is Sean Lee, and I live at 2438 Franklin Lane in Bradford Place. I am not a pilot. I don't know much about airports. In fact, I'm a stay-at-home mom, a former nurse. And to warn you, I don't think I'll be as entertaining as some of those that have talked before me, because my husband has told me my speech is somewhat dull. So, I am against the proposed runway extension. I have attended 2 meetings regarding the airport runway extension, one a city council meeting and one a planning commission meeting. I watched the 3rd meeting on August 1st on television as I was out of town on that day. During the first 2 meetings I attended, those that wanted the runway extended stated their main reason was to allow larger planes to be able to fly into the airport. A runway of 5,000 feet would allow this. Mr. Gerke, the airport manager, said that business executives with businesses in Murfreesboro call the airport asking how long is your runway, and some of them finding out that the runway is not 5,000 feet, they're not able to fly their planes in. We heard from MTSU, an MTSU representative, that said MTSU had wanted to purchase a 19-seater airplane, but wasn't able to do that because the runway was not 5,000 feet long. And these were both because of insurance reasons. Insurance companies would not allow these larger airplanes to fly in if the runway was not 5,000 feet long. Mr. Gerke also said that if the larger airplanes were allowed to fly in, if the runway is extended to 5,000 feet, that these airplanes would be ascending and descending at lower altitudes. So this makes me question the quality of life for the many residents that live around the airport. As you can imagine, these increased flights would also be accompanied with increased noises, which would decrease the quality of life for the many, many families that live in homes that are built very close to the airport. My family and I already anticipate an increase in the number of planes flying over our house with the current runway length because of the growth of Murfreesboro, the growth of Rutherford County, and the growth of MTSU. I'm assuming, I don't know for a fact, but I'm assuming as the enrollment of MTSU has increased, I'm assuming their Aerospace program enrollment has increased as well. I don't know for sure. I don't know the facts on that. These planes fly over our houses at all hours of the day. As has come up at the previous meeting, the airport has no restrictions on what time these airplanes fly. I have heard airplanes fly at 3 o'clock in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, late at night, all hours of the day, every day of the week. Then at the August 1st meeting with the Planning Commission, I heard over and over that safety was the main reason for extending the runway. And I was surprised to hear this reason because I had not heard that reason, or maybe I had and I had forgotten it, but it wasn't a main reason as it had been at the first 2 meetings I attended, where wanting the larger airplanes to come in was the main reason I heard at the first 2 meetings. Excuse me. As I heard or watched on television or heard each person stand up here and say that they wanted the runway extended for safety reasons, I began myself to be concerned that the airport wasn't safe. And so I went to the airport's website to get more information about the airport. And this is what I found on the Murfreesboro Airport's website, and I quote, "The Murfreesboro Municipal Airport was awarded the 2007 Airport of the Year Award for the state of Tennessee. The airport has also received 15 consecutive front door awards from the Tennessee Division of Aeronautics and Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. The Front Door Award recognizes airports that meet all of the requirements for certification, maintain safe operations, maintain grounds in good condition, and serve as good representatives of their community and of Tennessee to businesses that travel in and out of the city's front door at the airport," unquote. On another page of the airport's website, it states that, quote, "The Murfreesboro Municipal Airport was awarded the 2002 Most Improved Airport of the Year Award," unquote. Now, regarding the business executives flying in and out of the Murfreesboro Runway airport that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk, this is what the Murfreesboro Airport website says about the business executives that fly in and out of Murfreesboro. And I quote, "With a growing number of businesses and industries from all across the country building stores, restaurants, and facilities in Murfreesboro, owners, engineers, contractors, managers, and clients are using the airport to quickly conduct meetings, check on the businesses, and fly out to their next destination. The airport allows them the ability to efficiently and effectively conduct business in Murfreesboro and several other locations across the nation in one day." Well, needless to say, I was relieved to read this on the Murfreesboro Airport website. This is a safe airport. The Tennessee Department of Aeronautics says it's safe. The airport themselves say they're safe. And the Murfreesboro Airport says that they operate effectively and efficiently for the many business executives and others flying in and out of Murfreesboro. So this leads me to believe that the main reason those that want the runway extended is the reason I heard at the first two meetings. They want to allow larger airplanes to fly in and out of Murfreesboro. Please do not let this happen. Now, I am not against city growth. I am not against higher education. I am all for, in fact, getting a degree and getting a good job. What I am against is the expansion of the airport that is situated so close to a community sports complex and hundreds of family homes. These families that live near the airport would be negatively affected by more flights of larger airplanes and more airplane noise at any time and any day. And in my opinion, these larger airplanes could fly in and out of the Smyrna Airport. So please vote against the runway extension. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Holly Sears. I reside at 330 East Lytle Street in Murfreesboro. I'm also Vice President of Economic Development for the Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce. I just want to make a few points about the airport layout plan. As head of economic development, my job is to bring in more jobs and more companies into Rutherford County. Having a municipal airport is a huge asset within that. In fact, about 90% of the requests for information that I get from large corporations considering Rutherford County and Murfreesboro ask the question, do you have a general aviation airport within your community? It is a negative if we do not have that asset and that infrastructure within our community. Also, as it is part of our natural infrastructure that we have here, I think it's always prudent if we have an opportunity to improve or enhance that infrastructure, we should take our opportunity to do so. Just as we do with Medical Center Parkway, as we did with Beasley Road, State Route 840, it is part of our infrastructure to improve and enhance our overall community. Also, MTSU is an economic engine, and they put a lot of dollars into this program, the Aerospace program. We're hoping to build upon that Aerospace program and recruit more aviation jobs within the community. So this would be a great asset for not only to grow MTSU, but also grow our community. And last but certainly not least, the safety issue of that. I think it's very prudent upon us as a community to support making our pilots and our students in a safer environment also. So as a Rutherford County Chamber of Commerce, we would like you to approve the airport layout plan as presented. Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me. My name is Phil Lubear. I live at 2710 Howell Drive. That's in the Hamptons, which is a development just north of Bradford Place. There's about 240 houses in that development alone. I actually sent you all an email last night. You probably got flooded by emails, so you might not have seen it. I started mine by offering you my sympathies. You have a tough decision, and whichever decision you make, somebody's going to be mad at you. So, I'm sorry. But as a resident of the Hamptons, my biggest concern, and the gist of my email to you was, I'm mostly concerned that you don't have good information on this. There's been a lot of talk that you have facts. In fact, the only information that's been presented to you is largely from the Wiedemann Report. And the Wiedemann Report was commissioned specifically for the purpose of promoting the airport expansion. It's not by any means an objective report. And by reading it myself, I see, there's a few things in there that are really kind of questionable statements they make. The supposition that there's only going to be a 1% increase in air traffic per year. I don't see anything in there to support that. They didn't present any empirical data that would make that argument realistic. In fact, from what I'm hearing from a lot of the proponents in between talking about safety, I also hear a lot about how it's going to attract businesses and increase economic development in Murfreesboro, which is all great, but what that means, of course, is going to be increased traffic to the airport. Of course it's going to mean that. So yes, traffic is going to go up. If you develop the airport, make it more attractive, make it a larger, safer runway, then almost certainly you're going to get more traffic to it. So I'm concerned that the Wiedemann Report would make this claim that it's not going to be more than 1%. I don't know if that's true or not. The second issue in the report is the effect on real estate values. And the argument that they make is that since within a 5-mile radius, as you get closer to the airport, property values increase. And so this supposedly shows that the airport does not have a negative impact. In fact, the reason that property values increase is because the closer to the airport are the most recent developments with larger houses. That's simply why they cost more. What we're concerned about is if you do the expansion of the airport, how is that going to affect future real estate prices? And the report doesn't address that at all. I think there are sources you could look to. Probably the thing you should be looking to are similar situations in other airports. In fact, I attached one academic research paper from Reno Sparks area to that email, which quantifiably showed that, in fact, with each decibel of increase, there is a measurable amount of decrease in surrounding property values, depending on the distance from the airport. That's just two instances where I find fault with the Wiedemann Report. I think there's other issues. Somebody else raised the possibility that if an airport noise gets too big that you could actually restrict it. No, you can't, because there's no regulatory agency overseeing flights. If somebody wants to fly in the middle of the night, there's nobody to stop them. In fact, that's one of the complaints that I hear the most from my neighbors is that whenever a pilot violates FAA regulations, flies in too low over our rooftops, there aren't any traffic cops out there. They can do whatever they want. So, in fact, you will have no control over the usage of that airport if you approve this. You don't have any control now because there's nobody out there, and there's nobody going to be handing out traffic tickets. So these are two big issues that I have. What I would suggest, really, and I wish you would have done this before you come to a conclusion, is that you would commission a truly independent, nonpartisan study of the impact that this would have on the city, both economic and on property values. If you look at some of these studies, just the one I sent you, I just found that, in a 5-minute search, 5-minute Google search. I mean, I don't really have time to pursue these studies. This is the problem. The residents don't have the resources that the airport does to present these kinds of arguments. But if you did that, if you commissioned a truly independent study, then that might be something more to base your decision on than simply the one-sided report that you have now. Again, so I am obviously against the expansion. I'm not totally against it. If there were a possibility of expanding it and safety could be enhanced, and at the same time we could be sure that there was not increased traffic to the airport, the big issue, and the first point I made on that email is, you know, you're in a no-win position because I don't think there's any way that you can mix airports and residences. Residences are always going to suffer from airport noise. There's just no way around it. I don't think there's a good compromise here. That's why you're really faced with a decision about the future of Murfreesboro, really. Is it going to be a place, are you going to keep those communities in and around the airport as nice places to live? Or is the airport going to become a dominant part of that area, of really the whole northeast section of the city? If you allow the airport to continue to expand, and I would suspect, you know, the next thing they're going to want to do is reinforce the runway so that you can have larger flights in, so that you can attract more economic development, then that's obviously going to have a negative impact on the residences around there. There's just no way around it. So you got to decide. You're going to vote for the airport, you're going to vote for the residences. I'm afraid you really have to make a stark choice like that. And I hope that you will respect the residents of that area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jerry Thorburn. I live at 2019 Alexander Boulevard. I'm right underneath the flight pattern. People have talked about the safety being the reason for lengthening the runway and to bring in bigger airplanes is the other reason. I hope it's both. I have a pilot's license. I haven't flown in 10 years, so I do know the safety aspect of it. They talked about as the temperature goes up, it takes a lot longer for an airplane to take off. They have less runway should they have an engine failure. Twin engines, if they have an engine failure, they can still potentially climb. If they have a long enough runway, they can potentially get over the trees at the end of the south end of the runway. As it stands now, they might not be able to make it. It is a very safe airport, but your margin of safety is not that great. The greater the margin of safety you have, the better off you are. As far as if the increase in traffic does happen, I hope it's all big jets, because big jets are going to bring in business people who add to the economy, bring jobs, come to the community and spend money. Somebody mentioned tailgaters. I'm happy for tailgaters to come in town and spend their money. So I am living under the flight pattern. I've built 3 houses in the same area knowing the airport was there. If you don't want to live by an airport, don't live by an airport. And so I'm obviously for the runway lengthening.
Thank you. Again, let me ask you not to add to or subtract from anyone's comments. If you don't mind, just let those comments stand for what they said, and we'll not get into applause or groans or moans or anything like that. If you would help me do that, please. Yes, sir.
Mayor Bragg, Council, I'm Shelby Hunton. Live at 1021 East Clark. This is, my house was built in 1947, the first house on Clark, and probably first house in the area other than rural farmhouses. Also have 4 other houses under the traffic pattern, including where I live: 1145 East Clark, 610 Eventide, 14 and 11 Stonewall, 2931 Middle Tennessee. I don't think there's any impact in sound or values to any of my houses. That's all. And I'm for the expansion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Kathy Bennett, and I live at 723 Middleton Lane. And speaking of safety, the owner of N3218T, please don't fly directly over my house like you did last night, okay? When I got out of my car and looked up at this plane, I froze. I absolutely froze. That is part of the problem that people are discussing tonight. What I'm really disappointed in tonight, it's like we have residents against MTSU. Go blue. We all go blue. That is not the issue or the problem tonight. We are not against MTSU. We have a problem right now with noise, takeoff, and landings. MTSU, all of you in blue, and all of you that are here tonight, MTSU follows the flight pattern. MTSU is not our problem. What our problem is are people who have their planes and have their fun and do their thing. That's fine and dandy. But it's like being in a car, too. You can't just joyride. You cannot joyride. You have to pay attention. You have to be responsible. A flight pattern is out there. I'm seeing all kinds of people taking whatever path that they want to take. And if you don't believe me, you're all invited to the address I just gave you. It happens a lot. It happens constantly. It's not about MTSU, and everyone here will agree upon that. It's not about MTSU. We want MTSU to grow. We want Murfreesboro to grow. But we need some type of constructive. We have stoplights, we have yield signs, we have everything on the roads, but what do we have in our airport? They can do whatever they want to do. So if you want to talk about safety, 3218, you better be careful. And anybody else, I'll be out there with my binoculars and I'll be letting you know I've seen you. You're not flying correctly. And that I can pretty well say is not MTSU. That's what I have to say. I thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Jim Gardner. I'm the president and CEO of Murfreesboro Aviation Flight School here in town. I'm the other flight school.
And your address?
Yes. I also own two houses, 517 Dallas Court in Brett Mead subdivision, and 1816 Harold Lane, which backs up against the fence to the airport. A gentleman earlier stated that you have a decision to make, and it was to vote for the citizens or for the airport. The pilots here are citizens also, and I think that needed to be stated. You're not just voting for the airport, you're voting for the citizens who use that airport, and that's something to remember. Wish you would think about that as you say that, as you make your decision. The safety factor is true, and I will say it what nobody else will say, because nobody else wants to say it. What is one life worth? One life. That your extension could save one life. The extension could save one life. And what is that worth? My name is Jim Gardner. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Aaron Cope, 701 Eaglesham Drive. I just wanted to speak. I am a part-time employee of the Murfreesboro Airport. As you might wonder, you see the pale stripe on my face. I am the one, or actually I should say I'm part of the team that actually maintains that runway. I'm your employee. And as far as runway excursions, on several of those occasions, I am the one who witnessed it. I'm the first one on the scene. I'm the first one to call 911. One of those excursions, don't think it's proper for me to name the name of the corporation, but it's a corporation with a multi-million-dollar building here on Joe B. Jackson Parkway. I'm sure that was not very favorable with the city as far as having a short runway, and their multi-million-dollar jet went off the end of the runway. And as noise is a factor, I'm also the one that takes the phone calls from the public. I answer the phones. And to put it this way, I hear a lot of noise complaints from residents, which they have every right. If you have a problem, please call us. If the lady you think before us, you had a tail number, we will look into that matter. We don't have the legal authority, but we do know who to refer it to. So please call us if you would, if you see a tail number, or get us a description, and we will work to address that matter. And again, going back to the noise, I haven't taken that many complaints, really any at all, from Adams Place. I do also do a lot of business in Shelbyville. And consider this, Adams Place is directly across 231 from Murfreesboro Airport. In Shelbyville, directly across from 231, across from the airport, is Heritage Medical Center. If it's quiet enough to put a hospital directly across the street from an airport, then noise should not be a factor with the runway extension. I thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
David Forrest. I live at 2133 Aberdeen Circle, Village of Garrison. I'm up early every morning, sometimes late at night. The noise factor, there's more boom boxes and dogs barking that keep me up than the airplanes. The airplane's not a problem. The safety factor for the runway is a problem. I fly in and out with several of these men have spoken to you before as pilots. I understand that we need the extra length of the runway for safety reasons. And I wish and hope you vote in favor of this airport project. Like I say, the noise factor, and they fly over my house all the time at 1,000 feet, whatever. The boom boxes that's supposed to be an ordinance against are louder in my neighborhood and the dogs and the airplanes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Steve Jones. I live at 707 Judson Close. I thought it remarkable with all the presentation that Chad's report did not mention the word safety once. It was only brought out after the questioning. Number two, the residents are not opposed to the airport. It's true, we moved here knowing the airport is here. What we are against is increasing the traffic of the current airport. So that's what I like to say about that. I think the airport safety record speaks for itself. It's a 10. And this is very important. I've heard the pilots say they get a pucker factor. Well, maybe it's the wrong plane to be used at that airport. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Bob Ballard, 202 Kathy Lane. I'm a professional pilot, 36 years and over 16,000 flying hours. I obtained my excellent aviation education here at MTSU through its Airspace program. I use the Murfreesboro Airport very often. I fly probably the heaviest and fastest turboprop based here at the airport. We're probably the second or third largest purchaser of jet fuel there as well. And I can remember when using the airport when it was really out in the country. Mayor Westbrook was the mayor at that time. And I was younger and thinner, and of course I had hair too at that time. I was asked to come to this meeting nearly 30 years ago by a distinguished gentleman who believed that the runway extension was very, very important. The runway extension is not new. This is the second or third attempt to request to lengthen the runway with little to no success. That distinguished gentleman I mentioned believed that the runway extension is important to the city of Murfreesboro for future economic development and city growth. He would argue that it would enhance the business and safety of the airport, and he told me he may not be around then. Of course, when you're a young college student, you think everyone's going to be around forever. But it was important for me to be here, so I'm here tonight. As I've observed, the people here against the runway extension now are the same people that were here 30 years ago. Now, faces have changed, names have changed, well, exception of Miss Huda, and she's aged much better than I have, too, over the last 30 years, if I can add. And it's the same story, folks. You have a handful of homeowners misrepresenting and misstating the facts and the truth. They have scared the fellow homeowners in that area in believing their false statements. Consequently, it doesn't matter what anyone says, a professional or expert, what they tell them regarding the facts of the opinion, because they're not going to believe it anyway. Their minds are already made up. They really don't want to believe anything that's been told to them by the experts here. And let me tell you, folks, we're blessed. We are blessed. Chad Gerke, John Black, Tim Haskell, Ron Ferraro, George Huddleston. There's no hidden agenda on their parts. They're telling you the truth. They're telling you the facts. I wish you folks could believe it, but that's exactly how it is. The misbeliefs by these people are big aircraft landing and taking off out of Murfreesboro. Can't happen. They've already told you weight-bearing capacity is just not going to happen. The same aircraft today or the same aircraft tomorrow. Increased air traffic. Folks, they told you it's 1%. I don't think it'll grow any more than that. We hope for more traffic. Sure, we'd like that, but it's not likely. Similar airports, the Sumner County Regional Airport. We mentioned McMinnville with Shelbyville. I can go on and on and on. Their operations are actually less since they've had those extensions. It has not increased. Economy and the state of general aviation regarding cost and tax structure has deeply hurt general aviation. You just don't see the traffic ahead when I was back in the 70s and flying. Now, increased business, yes, we'll have increased business. And the best example I can give you is I fly an airplane that can go to Honduras nonstop. I cannot tank up here at the Murfreesboro Airport. I always leave 200 to 400 gallons less. I reposition to Fayetteville, and then I go nonstop to either Honduras or Costa Rica. That's a lot of money that's left on the table for the city. So increased business, yes, but I don't think you're going to see any increased numbers. Safety is not being an issue. Safety is always an issue. Yeah, and you gave us 10,000 feet of runway, we'll take it, no doubt about it. But safety is an issue for everyone. A longer runway will increase safety, and that is a worldwide, well-known fact without argument. Nobody can argue that at all. Just as Chad said earlier, automobiles in the 60s had seatbelts as an option. Why? That was to increase safety. City streetlights were put up in the city, put in place. Why? And that was to increase safety. If the homeowner's argument is that the runway extension does not increase safety, then I would tell the city, turn off all the streetlights and let's take back the seatbelt law. It just doesn't make sense at all. That distinguished gentleman I mentioned earlier who asked me to be here was Mayor Joe Jackson when I helped him 30 years ago when this issue came up and we only got 200 feet of runway. Please do not let history repeat itself. Your decision really is very easy. The few homeowners that have denied this city from having the airport facility it deserves and has allowed this to be a big injustice on the city. So on behalf of Mayor Jackson, my fellow aviators, the entire city of Murfreesboro, please vote yes in support of the runway extension. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, gentlemen. My name is James Natoli. I live at 715 Middleton Lane in Bradford Place. I'm the president of the Bradford Place Community Association, and I appreciate this opportunity. First, I want to say congratulations to Shane McFarland. Second, I want to say that we are opposed to the runway extension. We are not opposed to improving the airport. We're not opposed to MTSU's flight program. I'm disappointed that we're not hearing any talk of extending the runway to 4,200 feet. It has to be 5,000 feet or nothing, apparently, and that's beyond my understanding. This is not our jobs. Unlike the airport, we don't have paid consultants to represent us. We have to do our own research. We do rely on advice from professionals. That includes pilots that have contacted me. That includes FAA employees that have contacted me. We have realtors and excuse me, property appraisers that have advised us, and our findings do not support the airport layout plan. I'm ready for this to be over with. I feel like I've learned enough to earn credit hours in the Aerospace Department. It's not something that I wanted to study. Past councils created this problem by allowing the residential development around the airport. They allowed it to become directly adjacent to the airport. My question is, where was the airport? Where were the airport representatives at that time? Why weren't they here discouraging that development. Why weren't they saying, if you allow this, it's going to impede our future development of the airport? There's plenty of blame to go around on that front. I don't want to put all the blame on past councils. But we're here today to tell you that we do feel this would be a detriment to our community. This would be a detriment to our future with our property value and our quality of life. I'm going to correct Mr. Murphy. I brought this up at the Planning Commission. It was a 727, not 737. The airport representatives were kind enough to not point that out, but I want to make that correct. It was on May the 7th, 2002, and according to the Basic and Applied Science newsletter, only 2/3 of the existing runway was used. The pilot stated that did not even use the brakes. It was pointed out to me that maybe my memory was incorrect, and I pointed that out in the actual document, which I have. I have copies of, if you guys would like copies of it. But just to satisfy myself, I also went to the library, look at microfiche from that time. I worked for the Daily News Journal at the time. I was there, so I knew we covered it. There's some amazing photographs in here if you'd like to see them. But it also points out basically the same thing. I had hoped when I was going there that I'd be able to point out that the pilot was a MTSU alum, but apparently he wasn't. But I can say that Mr. Lyons attended MTSU, and he was instrumental in making sure that we got that plane in Murfreesboro. But Hal Exo was the pilot, and I probably am not saying that correctly. But he's quoted in there as saying there was plenty of runway there. And then in the Daily News Journal, and I'm going to have to correct myself, it wasn't 2/3 of the runway according to the Daily News Journal. It was actually about half of the 390-foot runway according to the Daily News Journal. So I'll correct myself, and those numbers are actually better for us anyway, right? So speaking of the Daily News Journal, I don't know if you guys pay any attention to the Daily News Journal, but they had a public opinion poll recently. Unfortunately, I did try to get exact numbers on this, but I wasn't able to. Apparently, they don't keep records of it. The last time I looked, there were 1,700 plus votes and I can't even remember the exact question, but regarding do you support the runway expansion? And at the time, it was 87% opposed in the public opinion poll. George Huddleston and Mr. Gerke used some airport examples in McMinnville and Shelbyville and some other places, and they've done this before. I immediately went home and looked these up on Google Maps. I hope Google doesn't mind me using their name. And if I'd known we were allowed to do presentations, I would have brought some of those photographs, and you would see that just looking at those areas, there's nowhere near the amount of residential development adjacent to their airports as there is in Murfreesboro. It's not even comparable. What this really boils down to is somebody's want versus a community's needs, and we don't feel we need this. And I don't think a want is enough reason to justify this. Mr. Gerke actually brought up something that I had forgot about, and it was the airport improved stormwater runoff. And I have a question about where will that displaced water go? I can tell you what we call Lake Bradford, with no affection, is at capacity and threatens to flood houses already. increased water capacity would not be an option for that area. So somebody needs to make sure that water, I'm sure Mr. Swanson isn't going to take care of that for us, who owns the area that that water runs off into and then drains over into what we call Lake Bradford. Mr. Gerke also brought up the AOPA. I wish that 30 years ago he could have read the article that I read today named Guide to Obtaining Community Support for Your Local Airport. Some of the stuff it says, are some of the obvious things. Safety and noise concerns can be attributed to poor, inadequate, and non-existent land use planning and zoning of properties in close proximity to the airport. They also pointed out that because of this, in the past 5 years, 135 public use landing facilities, have been lost. And I'm assuming that's airports, landing facilities. They also pointed out that that's not the entire reason those were lost, that their findings were in some of these communities that they would prefer the definite revenue from property tax to the theoretical revenue developed from an airport. It also brought up another question that begs for answering, and that's as the airport sponsor, which I'm assuming the city is. It says that it places a certain obligations on the airport sponsor for accepting federal FAA funds. One of the most important and compelling obligations placed on an airport sponsored by FAA is that the sponsor take appropriate action, including adoption of laws to the extent reasonable to restrict the use of land adjacent to or the immediate vicinity of the airport to activities and purposes compatible with normal airport operations. I don't think that in this case the city has lived up to that obligation by allowing residential areas to be developed directly adjacent to the airport, and have fallen short on that. And that alone, I believe, would be enough reason to deny the airport extension. I guess in addition to that, once these floodgates are open, there is no shutting them. There is no closing them or containing them. It's only one step in the direction of future possibly increasing the depth of the runway to accept even larger planes. So I hate to keep using analogies, but let's not open Pandora's box in this situation and stop this tonight and deny the airport layout plan. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Bob Kinney. I have property at the south end of the airport near the university. I've lived in that house over the years, other than working in other places around the country since that time. And I have heard noise ever since the airport was behind the university. Some people like noise from airplanes. We all look up. And when you're up above, your nose is not looking up, you're looking down. It's a different perspective. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to invite everybody that's opposed to this out to the airport, and you can call the airport, and I will give you a ride and show you what everything is like. If you look at the patterns and you look at this, maybe you'll change your ideas and opinions. The council has a very heavy burden on you tonight, because the decision that you make may cause a life to be lost or a group of lives to be lost. There are 3 of us in the room tonight who have flown over 2,000 children under a Young Eagles program, and we give these
kids' rides, so we take the fear away from what is happening in aviation and what people are saying. So when I have 3 children in my airplane, and I had not a catastrophic failure, but I had a partial engine failure with 3 children on board. And I would love to have had that extra 1,000 feet to get those children back down on the ground safely. Luckily, I was in a position where the engine was still running. I lost the cylinder, and I got the airplane down. Now, that 1,000 feet extra would have been a real benefit to me with those 3 children. They are our children from Murfreesboro. One of the speakers mentioned the corporate airplane that ran off the end of the runway. There are a lot of factors that cause airplanes to have problems. One is weather. We're talking about improving the runway because it needs to be improved, and we're talking about extending it. That particular airplane landed after a thunderstorm. And the reason that it went off the end of the runway is because of all the water and the pulling up of the water on the runway, and the anti-skid brakes were not able to slow the airplane down enough to get it landed on the runway. So putting another 1,000 feet on that runway probably could have saved that airplane, and it will save other airplanes from the local people and also the people that fly in on business. Another reason that we need the extension of the runway is because, as the gentleman mentioned about not being able to take off with a full load of fuel, and Mr. Peruzzi also mentioned the pucker factor. I am concerned about that too. But if we have that extra 1,000 feet, it's a safety. It's a safety factor for not only the pilots, but it's a safety factor for the city of Murfreesboro, which could get into a lawsuit because of some problem with the runway. So I ask you to consider that. The other thing that I would just like to mention is that the gentleman that spoke before me that talked about the 727 that landed out there, the reason that it stopped in a very short distance is because it was empty and it had a very minimum amount of fuel on board that airplane. That airplane, under normal circumstances, probably could not have landed in 4,000 feet. But it was a planned operation, and I think there was only about 10,000 pounds of fuel left on it. And these pilots were professionals. They do this all the time. So my plea to you is, when you think about the decision that you're about to make, you think about whether or not you can save 1 life or you can save 3 or 4 or 5. And if something happens, what burden you're going to carry with you for the rest of your life by the decision that you make tonight. And I'll say one more thing. I do live in Hendersonville now, but I have property here, and I'm here just about as much as I am in Hendersonville. And if you want to talk about noise, I'm 10 miles from the Nashville airport, and everything that comes in, especially during weather, when the clouds are down, when we have low ceiling, comes right over the top of my house. And if you think that you have noise in Bradford Place, I invite you all up. We'll have a barbecue, and we'll sit out there, and we'll listen to these airplanes. So please, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Council. My name is John King. I live at 2334 Sulphur Springs Road. I've lived in Murfreesboro for 20 years. I graduated from MTSU. I graduated from high school here. I went through the Aerospace program. It's a great program. It's brought a lot of value to the city. Other people have illuminated, just used up the idea of how much they've given you data on what this runway will do for us, what the extension can mean for people who get into situations that nobody wants to face, loss of an engine on takeoff. In response to the gentleman earlier who was talking about the 727 landing here, that was landing. It's taking off where airplanes are going to need that extra 1,000 feet to stop and go. But like I said, people have beaten that topic to death. I do want to tell you that since I live right underneath the traffic pattern, I hear everybody that goes over, landing north, landing south, I'll hear it coming in. The most amount of noise I get is when a C-130 goes right over my house going to Smyrna on the ILS approach path. The Vol 7 arrival going into Nashville is the main arrival that's used from the southeast into Nashville. It travels over Murfreesboro about 4,000 feet. Those events, large airplanes traveling to Nashville and large airplanes going to Smyrna, are the most common instances of noise at my house. Most of the time I never hear anybody out at night. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe I just sleep too deeply. I have not had an issue with the noise from Murfreesboro. Most of the time if I go, what was that? Because of the noise from an airplane. I'm usually outside, and I see somebody flying to Smyrna, coming in to land at night because of the approach path, which provides them safety on the way into an untowered airport at night. Murfreesboro doesn't have that issue. We're fortunate in that case. I don't see this becoming a large issue. I believe the data that's been presented to me. The growth is manageable, the growth is reasonable, and so I encourage you to support this extension.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Williams. I live at 1535 Las Casas. I'm right underneath the aircraft traffic pattern. Professional pilot, have been. I'm kind of retired now. I'm one of those 29-year-old retired pilots as well. A couple of things I've noticed here tonight. I have sympathy for those that do endure the noise. And, we also, like as some gentlemen stated earlier, we have to endure our neighbors cutting their grass with their lawnmowers. So noise is with us. We're going to hear it on the interstate. We're going to hear it on the major thoroughfares of Murfreesboro, and it's just part of progress. We have done a couple of things. Somebody mentioned we graduated from just the seat belts to airbags to improving safety. We've had a number of improvements here in Murfreesboro. We've widened the streets on some two-lane streets. We put very nice shoulders on those streets. And we didn't increase the size of the vehicles that were using those streets. We increased safety. We also allowed some of our residents to ride bicycles on those widening of those roads as well, so it kind of benefited the people there. A couple of things that I've noticed in here, and not to be argumentative, but even the pilots flying out of an uncontrolled airport aren't just a bunch of cowboys taking off and going hither and yon, flying wherever they want to. The individual on the ground may not be aware of the regulations we fly under, but we fly under very stringent regulations. And anyone caught breaking those regulations can lose their license for a period of time. They can be fined, or they can lose their license for life. So a pilot, before he violates a federal aviation regulation, has to think very seriously about where he's flying and so forth. With all due respect to the lady, if she's using binoculars to read the N number on the side of an airplane, I would love to invite her out. I own a little airplane, a little puddle jumper. I'm not a wealthy guy or nothing like that. And my T-hanger faces the runway. I would invite her to come out to my T-hanger and let the airplanes take off, and her read the numbers off the side of them to me. You can't do it. So, if you got to use binoculars, the airplane, and airplanes are flying an approved approach there, even though we are an unmanned, untowered airport. Another thing I would like to mention at this time, the last week we had I believe it was a G2, Gulfstream G2 in our airport. I happened to be in front of my T-hanger at the time it came in and at the time it left. I was watching it for the very reason of being able to kind of report here tonight on what I observed. I was on the cell phone, and the airplane, when it took off, a G2 is a high-performance airplane, and I don't know how he was loaded. I don't know how much fuel, how many passengers, whatever. But I noticed that by the time he passed over the residence at the south end of the field, he was probably at 3 or 4 times the airport traffic pattern altitude. I could not even hear his engines any more than a conversation next to me. When he passed by me out there, he only interrupted my conversation on my cell phone, and bear in mind, I was just a taxiway and a little grass from the runway, from the main portion of the runway, where he would be powered up at his takeoff power. He only interrupted my phone conversation about 2 or 3 seconds. The technology of the engines are better today. They're quieter. Back to the old seesaw we've been going all night. We're probably getting the largest airplanes in here now, and have been. I won't mention the corporation's name, but they used to fly, and still do, I think, occasionally, a Falcon 50 in here. It's a 3-engine jet airplane. It's a fairly large airplane. The engines on it are turbofan engines. They're quiet, and you'd get more noise out of a smaller prop-driven airplane than you would out of that airplane. But an increased length in that runway would definitely improve the safety of that. When it, back again to the safety factor of things, the FAA has to approve everything that's done in aviation. The manufacturing of airplanes, the changes in airplanes, everything is done with a high degree of consideration. And they don't just let people go out and do whatever they want with their airplanes. We don't expect our homes to burn down, but most of us, if we're prudent, we have fire extinguishers in them. And we put those fire extinguishers there to add safety to our family and our home in there. And I would encourage you to approve this airport extension. Beyond all of the conversation we've had, I believe that the facts and figures will show that it increases the safety factor. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Paul Mosey. I live at 2628 Battleground Drive. I'm the chief flight instructor at MTSU. I'm not here representing MTSU at this particular time. I'd just like to speak on a couple of different issues. I'll try and keep it short. Feels good to stand up, by the way. November 3218 Tango is a 177 Cardinal. It's a corporate-owned aircraft out of Omaha, Nebraska. Smartphones are a wonderful thing. I do want to thank the folks for the kind comments towards MTSU's flight training program. We do appreciate that. We do try to stay safe. If you have an issue like this, you call me. I will take care of it. I live 2 miles west of the runway. I have planes coming over my house every day. I've lived there for 18 years. I paid taxes for 18 years. The runway was there when I got here. We're all neighbors. We have different opinions. Obviously, whatever the vote is, we'll still be neighbors, and I'm sure we'll agree on something in the future. I'm going to speak tonight briefly in 2 senses, one as a pilot and one as a resident. My taxes have been fairly level since I got here. My house is about the size of Mr. Tankard's living room or so. 2,200 square feet, fairly modest home. I pay about $1,200, $1,400 a year in property taxes. My brother in New Jersey pays $1,400 a month for a 900 square foot house. I attribute some of that to the growth of Murfreesboro. When I came here, it was 42,000 people. That was 18 years ago. Somebody else had mentioned it's grown twice that much since then. I think businesses coming in have helped that business tax base, and hopefully has helped us keep ours down a bit. So I'm all about growth, and coming with growth, and having an airport, it's going to grow. One other point I'd like to point out about corporate aircraft, they're not all these giant behemoth jet aircraft. Corporations, oftentimes when they start cutting costs, they cut their corporate aircraft first because they're very expensive. There are many, many single-engine aircraft and many, many light twin aircraft that fly executives around the area. So I just wanted to make mention of that. I do want to address the safety issue, and I know a lot of people kind of are getting tired of the safety issue, but you can't. And the example I'd like to give you, first of all, longer runways are always safer. Safety is paramount, as they say, wherever they are. We are they. Safety is paramount. Throughout history, there have been millions and millions and millions of hours of flight. And throughout history, one single accident has always been caused, or many times has been caused for changes in law. So out of the millions of hours, so we can say that 4 overruns in 18 years, one speaks highly of the pilots that are flying in and out of there, and a lot of them are my kids and my instructors. but it speaks highly of that. It may seem like not a lot when we say, well, that's 4 out of maybe a million. But if I were to compare that to something, and maybe a little bit different comparison than a comparison to street lights or lines on the streets would be, my comparison would be if there were 4 near drownings in 18 years at the sports com, I think people would be very vigilant when we send our kids there to swim. And that's just one of those things. And other people have mentioned the fact that, how much is one life worth? Or how much is property damage worth? Or how much is anything worth? We believe in the aviation community wholeheartedly that we have to be safe. And especially, and I mentioned this the last time, that the students that we're training are going on, as Dr. Farrar mentioned, to be professional pilots. And we want to instill that in them, and we want to give them the best chance we can. So I strongly urge, from myself as a pilot and a resident, that you consider approving the extension of the runway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Joe Russell, 560 Osborne Lane. Like I said last time, my house is the one that's got the striped yellow line across the roof because I'm right in the middle of the flight pattern. I'm an MTSU grad. Several of you guys know me. And my roommate in college was a pilot, so I've been on off this runway several times, about 60 flights so far, and I really enjoyed it. It's a neat experience. I think what we're running into here tonight, I'm not for or against. I'm kind of one of those fence rider guys. You're dealing with the fear of the unknown. Wife comes home. I'm pregnant. Great. Up until the point you're sitting there going, she have 1, 5, 4, okay. And so you never really know until you go and you hear, thank gosh, it's 1 heartbeat or just 2 and not 8. So that's kind of what you're running into. And I've talked with Mr. Alott about this a little bit as well. I don't mind air traffic. I'm a grown-up. When I moved there, bought my house, I knew there was an airport there. I'm okay with that. It was a known variable. I think what we're doing tonight is we're talking about maybe changing that variable, which is a little bit of concern. I don't mind additional traffic. As long as the planes don't get any bigger, no problem. As long as this type of expansion is going to make it safe, fine. Once again, no problem. As long as 5 years from now, we don't come in and go, oh, well, we got the longer runway. Hey, let's make it thicker now so we can get the bigger planes in. That would be changing up the game. I think that's the fear that a lot of these people have tonight they've been expressing to you. I don't know what you guys can do as far as language and the documentation that you're going to do if you approve this to maybe, let's talk a solution instead of, bantering back and forth about what the problem is. We all know what the issues are. What are the solutions? That's what we need to be thinking about. Let's be proactive about that instead. I don't know if you can, put language in the document that limits the rating of the airport to never change. I don't know why you would want to do that. It would limit you in the future as well. There's been arguments back and forth about that as well. So, but those are things I haven't heard tonight. I've been sitting over there for, going on almost 3 hours now, listening to this conversation, and did this at the last meeting. I wanted to get up and speak rather late because I wanted to listen to what most of the arguments are. So when I got up here, I could see kind of what the tenor is of the group. And it's one of those deals where that's what I do for a living, is I try to propose solutions to what all the problems are. And in closing, I'm going to test this theory. Anybody's got 5 acres up in Las Casas, I'm looking to build a house. So we'll test the property values thing come springtime at 560 Osborne Lane, just in case anybody's looking for a house. So anyway, but that's what I want to say. I don't know what kind of language you guys can maybe put in there if you want to, if that's something of interest. A lot of the residents that live in the neighborhood, I have heard a lot of concerns. The noise is an issue, but it's, I moved there knowing that. And I think it's neat living next to the airport. I like seeing the aircraft. You never know what you're going to see. You got biplanes going over. We had the Osprey come over the other day, which was interesting to watch him buzz over. And so it is entertaining as well. It can be annoying at times, and I have to stop a conversation here and there. It's never the end of the world. But at the same time, I would, instead of rushing to judgment or rushing to make a decision, if you can maybe find a solution that answers both problems. I enjoy the airport. I think safety is a good concern. I think we do need to make sure that the pilots do have the length that they need. I think that
what will address the situation and the additional noise, or at least larger planes coming in, which will be noisier, in my opinion, is what I think the main concern of a lot of the residents have. And so if you can find a way to fix that, I think you'd solve your problem. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
That's our first neutral.
My name is Matthew Torres, and I live at 1632 Centerpoint Drive, and I'm also a flight instructor at MTSU. A couple things I would like to bring up that have been brought up before is some of the points that have been made by the ones that are opposed for it. Clearly, I am for the runway extension with it, but some of the arguments that have been made is, one was, again, going back to the 727 and the fact that if the 727 could land here, then any other aircraft coming in here, the current length shouldn't be an issue. Right? It's been mentioned before, weather is a huge factor in that. Right? The 727 planned out when it was coming in here, what day it came in, the weather conditions were optimal for it landing. Part of the other reason it was able to land without using brakes is it has reverse thrust, which actually creates thrust in the opposite direction to counter out the braking effectiveness that they have to use. Right? Another aspect that I would like to clarify is a couple times it's been mentioned about if a plane goes off the runway, whether or not it's pilot error or if it's because the runway is in fact too short. Right? The longer the runway, the drastically increases safety. Right? Pilot error to me comes in with a classification of what makes it easier for the NTSB, which is what controls looking into accidents and incidents. I kind of relate this to driving, right? How many people in here know someone who has rear-ended somebody or has rear-ended somebody themselves, right? Regardless of what the reason is, the insurance companies will call that an at-fault incident of whoever was in the car, regardless of what the reasoning is. All right, let's say you're driving and you blew a tire. Well, the blown tire is the reason of it, but you're still going to be at fault considering it, right? With the short runway, well, if you blew a tire when you're with only a few hundred feet left, you might run off the runway, but that's not due to pilot error. That's due to the fact that the tire blew and you couldn't really do anything about it. An extra 1,000 feet could easily save that and prevent possible, at least one life, if not more. So I just kind of wanted to clarify the pilot error aspect of that and the length. A greater length would definitely be tremendously more safe than what it is now. Thank you.
Thank you. Others wishing to speak? Last chance? All right, here comes last chance.
Got to keep the streak going. I've been up here at every public speaking. I'm Terry Darsley, I'm TSU's chief pilot. I was sitting back there thinking about it. I've flown 10 different aircraft off your airport this year. I fly about 400 hours a year off of that airport. Please extend it. Please don't pass up this opportunity to make my life safer. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you get his address, Mr. Sheldon? I needed an address, Terry.
1301 East Month.
Thank you.
My name is Bill Cook, and I live at 1802 Marion Lane. It's about 2 miles northeast of the airport. And I just moved to Murfreesboro, and I made an offer on a house, quite a bit south of the city. But I really investigated living near the airport, and noise has not become a problem, and I enjoy living there, and I'm definitely in favor of the airport being extended. Thank you.
And welcome to Murfreesboro.
Thank you.
Anyone else wishing to speak? Last chance? All right. I'll close the public hearing at this time, and we'll consider adoption of the master plan amendments for the proposed Murfreesboro Municipal Airport 2012 Airport Layout Plan. I'd like to congratulate all our speakers. I certainly appreciate those who have spent so much time and done excellent research and have shared their wonderful advice with us. Many have told terrific personal stories. I think we have learned that you can go on the internet and find out who owns a plane by looking at the tail number, and that was something I hadn't gotten that far down the internet yet, so I think that's a good idea. I think one of the reasons that 727 landed in Murfreesboro was because it knew it wasn't ever going to have to take off from Murfreesboro. So I think those of us that were out there were excited for the event, but we didn't get to see the sequel of it getting to take off and to see what would have happened. I know it was a stripped-down 727, and it was to be used, and a wonderful gift from FedEx to MTSU. So I'm going to give that plug without having, hopefully not being fined 25 cents by the Lions Club for doing that. But we've had some great information tonight, and I'm not sure what the council's wishes would be, but we have a council member that is missing tonight, and I think this is a very important subject. Obviously, I think that on the merits, it should be discussed by the whole council, and I would like to suggest to council members, with their approval, that we do not vote tonight on the plan, that we wait till we have a full council here, and that perhaps could be next week or some other time. But this is an issue that's been on the table for 30 years, and I don't know what your wishes are in that regard, but certainly I'm happy for Mr. McFarland. I'm disappointed he could not attend tonight, but I would ask you to consider the fact that even though a number of speakers have mentioned they'd like to get it over with, we still have an opportunity to make a further decision on the extension at some time in the future, because we'll have to fund it, we'll have to approve funds for it, and it's kind of like our capital improvement plan, Ms. Harris. We're just approving the plan tonight, the amendments from the old plan to the new plan, and we're not actually passing the runway extension literally tonight. We'll have to come up with some money to do it, and we'll have to get an approval in the future for that. But it's up to you as to what your wishes might be.
I'd like to ask a question. I don't know why you called me out on that, Mayor.
Well, I was just mentioning it was like the CIP, because those things have to be funded at the future.
I understand.
We're just trying to think ahead.
You know, Murfreesboro is a great community. I mean, we're growing leaps and bounds about 3% a year. And it's a tough decision, because you hear both sides, and then you're going to make some mad, some going to be happy, you know. But that's, I guess, I wish I had known that before I got on the council, but I mean, that's how it is. But as a citizen, personally, I'm just speaking for myself, I would like to see us come together, even if we have to compromise. I'm just throwing this out, it's just on my heart, and I just want to say it, you know, if not 1,000 feet, can we compromise a little shorter? Stipulations on times flights can come in and out, for example. Stipulation on the type of flights can come in. You know, I just hate to see our community split over something like this, because we are noted for, I think, the 8th or the 12th most livable community, you know, nationwide. So I just really wish we could come together as a community with a compromise, and everybody be a little happy. I mean, it's still going to be somebody, even if we come up with a compromise, that it's not going to be happy. But I honestly feel within my heart, in meeting people and talking to people, not only on this issue, but in general, that we can come together as a community. We have a university, the #1 university in the state. You know, we have not always been the #1 university, but we are. So as a community, I would like to see us maybe, if we can, come together with a compromise. In talking to the people, like I said, I've spoken to about 300 people. The first, when I was out there that day, I saw about that weekend, it was over 200 people, either stopping them or knocking on the doors, and some were for and some were against, but a lot of people said, hey, can we come together? And so I would just like for us to, this is a big decision. I know it's a lot of people antsy about us making the decision, but I would like to see if we can come together with some type of compromise. I mean, that's what I'm proposing to the council. I don't know how any other council members feel.
Mr. Gilley?
Mayor, following along with what Ms. Harris was saying, and I brought this up at the Planning Commission level too, I understand the safety issue for the airport. I get that. But it was also said that any expansion would promote safety. And all the neighbors that I've talked to, their concern is the runway hitting that magic 5,000-foot number. I still don't understand why it couldn't be extended something short of that, which increases the safety for the planes that are coming in now, to give the neighbors the assurance that that next level of plane would not be able to be able to come in here. And I still don't have an answer to that question. I just don't understand that. As to your suggestion about what to do with Mr. McFarland being absent tonight, I think you're right. I think this is something that deserves the vote of the full council, because, I could very easily see with the six of us here tonight this ending up a 3-3 split. And I'm not sure, I think, how Robert's Rules of Order would address the outcome of that. I think I know the answer to that. Ms. McGinnis might be able to say, but with, I think, the potential of that being there, I think we need all 7 of us here for that. Hate to put that burden on Shane, but it is what it is.
And having said that, Toby, I guess you've got a good point. Ms. McGannon, I'm going to pass it over to you and ask you, if this vote were to wind up in a tie tonight, what would be the situation? Or should we just wait until... if it wound up in a tie, I guess we could ultimately go back and say, okay, Shane, it's up to you. Because basically he would be the tie-breaking vote. But are we better off if we wait, or are we better off if we vote tonight?
I think it's always better to have clarity, and I think you're likely to have clarity with 7 members present, because I haven't heard any members suggest that they have a conflict that would require them to abstain. What the consequence would be if you had 3-3 would depend on what the motion was. This council has frequently taken topics back up, and I think it could, but I would think it would be more consistent with the city's past practice on similar types of issues to wait till you had all 7.
And you haven't said that. I would suggest, or like to put a motion on the floor, that we postpone the vote until next week.
It might be clearer. I think everyone's expecting that we will meet next week. It might be clearer if you said until the next council meeting where all members can be present, if that's what is motivating the motion.
Yeah, and I agree with that, but if everybody's planning to be here next week, I would sure like for us to go ahead and get it over with, because I know at the same time we're talking about a lot of sleepless nights for people, and even if that's the only issue that we have on the calendar, as long as all the members can be present, I think this is something that we need to go ahead and put to rest.
I wasn't trying to imply that it wasn't.
Right.
Mr. McFarland's absence was known now.
Right.
We don't know what conflict might arise for you next week.
Right.
And so I think that other members of the council would want the same presence of 7.
Next week at 7 o'clock, the MTSU football team will have already been playing for 30 minutes.
You know what the Titan score is tonight?
I have no idea. Do you know? I don't.
I don't.
But if you thought that we might meet next week as being the next meeting, is it possible to consider moving the meeting till 5 o'clock or another appropriate time in deference to those who want to go to the ball game? And I just bring that up as it would just happen to be from a conflict from their scheduling point of view.
I have an engagement at 5 that I really need to be at. And I'm scared of that because we already always had council meeting at 7.
I understand.
Okay, I'll adjust my motion to say at the next council meeting we should vote on this issue.
But we're all seven and present.
We're all seven
That we're all
present.
seven and present.
I would second that, and then also, Mr. Smotherman, Tennessee's up 32 to 27 with 311 in the fourth right now.
So we're not going to consider a coming together compromising? The council's not for that?
I'm sure Mr. Gerke and maybe we could get some more information. I think if I recall, again, I don't think we got a good answer, but if you were going to go ahead with any extension, you might as well go ahead with 1,000 feet, I believe was the...
So it's all or none?
It's always been, and I think that's what's been on the table 30 years. It was either don't do anything or go on and do the 1,000. Again, that is all the property we own, and that is the aviation easement that we can gain, and we don't have to tunnel under or bridge over the Jarnett Lane or Northfield. It just finishes the property, or it doesn't get us to the cemetery either. So, I mean, I think that's what it is.
I mean, people keep saying 30 years ago, but that's 30 years ago. I'm
Well,
just
it was
talking
20
about
years ago and 10 years ago, frankly. Yeah.
Okay.
It was on the table, I think, when I got elected 11 years ago. Because we have to do the plan, what, about every 5 years? So you look at the same thing every 5 years.
The motion is to put the vote off.
You have a motion and a second. Everybody understand the motion? Was that all? Do you understand the motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Why don't you call the roll then?
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. Thank you all. You're free to go if you like. We have more business to conduct. I know you'd be interested in it, but you may have other things you wish to do at this time. All right, Ms. Wright, could we go ahead with the beer permits?
We don't have any beer.
No beer permits. Payment of the statements. Council members, you have statements to be considered for payment.
Move we pay the bills.
Second.
Mr. Young, Mr. Gilly, pay the bills. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly? Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. I have no board and commission appointments. Other business from staff or the city council to come before the council. Ms. McGannon?
Yes, Mayor, at the previous council meeting, we continued some hearings that had been set for September 20th to September 27th. I mentioned 3 of those to the council, but Ms. Machado advises that the 4th one I did not specifically call out and would like to ask the council's concurrence. The zoning application for approximately 7.26 acres along Compton Road for a PRD amendment would also be moved from the 20th to the 27th.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. Thank you, Ms. Machado. Other business, Mr. Adelot.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. I have an item regarding a mandatory referral on Robert Rose Drive. During its meeting in June of 2012, the Planning Commission approved a site plan for a multifamily development along Robert Rose Drive north of Medical Center Parkway. This development involved the relocation of an existing sewer that crosses the property and a storm drain that exists in the former right-of-way of Cherry Laurel Lane that also crosses the property. The owner is requesting that after the sewer is relocated and after the storm drain is relocated, the owed and unneeded easements be quitclaimed back to him to allow construction of buildings in these areas. During this meeting, the Planning Commission discussed the matter and approved the mandatory referral regarding these easements. It is recommended, excuse me, trying to move too fast. It is recommended that the council approve the abandonment of the easements. Move my.
We on the Planning Commission have never seen Mr. Adelite at a loss for words like that before.
This may be a first. Neither is staff.
Is there a motion?
Trying to move too quick, I guess.
You want a motion, Mayor?
He's down to
All right,
fight.
I'm trying to get to the recommendations so we can get out of here. Excuse me. It is recommended that the council approve the abandonment of the easements after the sewer and storm drains have been relocated, and that the council authorizes the mayor to sign the necessary quitclaim deeds to accomplish these abandonments. It is further recommended that this approval be subject to the owner providing necessary deed descriptions for inclusion in the documents. And the Plan Commission has approved this mandatory referral, and the Water and Sewer Board has been advised that this matter is being brought to the council tonight. All utility costs will be on the responsibility of the developer. We recommend approval.
All right. Any questions, Ms. Adelite, regarding this mandatory referral? What is it? Mandatory?
That's correct, Mayor.
All right.
Move for approval. Second.
Motion is second. Please call the roll.
Mr. Gilly?
Aye.
Ms. Gels Harris?
Aye.
Mr. Smotherman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Washington?
Aye.
Mr. Young?
Aye.
Mayor Bragg?
Aye. Any other business to come before the council? If not, you're adjourned. Thank you.